지연이 되었습니다.
We apologize for being delayed. Hello everyone, I am Sung-hee, key expert working in the EU-Korea Climate Action Team. I'd like to express my gratitude to all participants attending the webinar on EU-Korea Climate Action Project aimed at achieving 2050 carbon neutrality. The EU-Korea Climate Action Project has been funded by the EU, started in 2018, carrying out various climate-related activities for 3 years and 9 months. Today's event is a closure event to summarize the achievements of past activities and to seek ways to move toward a carbon neutrality society based on the result that we have been carried out. We have invited partner organizations in Korea and Europe that have been conducting cooperative projects with our team. We'll be covering various tasks to be addressed to achieve carbon neutrality in key areas such as energy, building, and transportation. Local governments, youth, civil society organizations are also joining us to share their views on key issues. Thank you once again for joining us, and please stay with us until the end. So, ladies and gentlemen, we will officially begin the event. First of all, we will hear the opening remarks and congratulatory remarks by the host organization. First of all, there will be an opening remarks by His Excellency John Bogarts, the Deputy Head of the European Union Delegation to Korea in charge of Korea-EU climate actions. Please come forward.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Bogarts. I'm the Deputy Head of Delegation here at the EU Delegation to Korea, and it's a great pleasure for me to join you today on behalf of the delegation. I've had the honor to speak at these events already quite a number of times, so it's real pleasure for me to also be here at today's event, which is a special one, of course, because it's the last one to be organized in the framework of the EU-Korea Climate Action. And I'm honored to celebrate its achievement with you, and also to hear from you and to look ahead towards the future and to see how we can build on what has been achieved. As you know, the Climate Action Project was launched in 2018 to support Korea's transition towards a low-carbon economy. The project has complemented our own government-level climate diplomacy by engaging directly with local authorities, civil society organizations, students, and businesses in Korea. This inclusive and bottom-up approach is essential, considering that local action is paramount in the fight against global climate change. As we are increasingly witnessing, worldwide climate change is happening. This summer's extreme weather events, the unprecedented floods in Germany and Belgium, or the deadly wildfires in Greece, to name just two, are indications of what potentially may lie ahead. The climate crisis is an existential threat for our future, and it is self-inflicted. Unlike for the COVID-19 pandemic, there will be no immunization, no vaccine against the effects of climate change. Since the adoption of the Paris Agreement in December 2015, more and more countries, regions, cities, and companies have committed themselves to carbon neutrality and set ambitious targets, including here in Korea. Korea and the EU both have committed to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050 and have adopted Green Deals, which will help leverage green investments and promote digital innovations. Last May, in the margins of the P4G summit held in Seoul, all 243 of South Korea's local governments pledged to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. To preserve the world we know for future generations, we must turn our commitments and ambitions into reality, and determined action is needed today. And I think that our climate project has, over the years, been able to lay a good foundation for that. My colleague Marta Olender, based at headquarters of the EU in Brussels, will in a few minutes present the EU's recently adopted Fit for 55 package, a comprehensive legislative proposal concretely outlining how the EU intends to deliver on its 2030 climate targets, basically reducing our net emissions by at least 55% by 2030. With the adoption of Europe's first climate law earlier this year, this target is no longer an aspiration but a firm legal obligation, and it will be a milestone on the EU's path towards climate neutrality by 2050, and we very much welcome that Korea is taking the same steps, even though we are hoping that its intermediate targets will become more ambitious. In the next sessions, you will hear how the Low Carbon Action Project has facilitated practical exchanges and partnerships between Europe and Korea in support of local climate action initiatives. Cooperation focused on particularly important sectors, including local energy transition, energy efficiency in buildings, as well as low carbon mobility. So in closing, I always want to say that I very much look forward to today's workshop, and that I hope to learn more about your ideas on how we could build on the past cooperation and launch new initiatives to accelerate our journey towards climate neutrality in Europe and Korea. Thank you very much.
네, 감사합니다. 말씀 잘 들었습니다. 다시 한번 큰 박수 보내주시면 감사하겠습니다.
Let's give
네,
another warm round
감사합니다.
of applause. Thank you very much. Next, we'd like to listen the congratulatory remarks of a chairperson, Yoon Sun-jin of 2050 Carbon Neutrality Commission. She's also heading the Energy Transition Forum. She sent us a video congratulatory remarks as she had participated as a member of research group in charge of the carbon neutral strategy and police research project. Due to the prior engagement, she couldn't join us today but sent a video message. So ladies and gentlemen, please watch the video message.
존경하는 존 보가트 주한 EU 대표부 부대사님, 그리고 한 EU 기후행동 사업을 위해 힘써주신 주한 EU 대표부 직원 여러분, 오늘 행사에 참석하신 여러 귀빈 여러분 반갑습니다. 대한민국 2050 탄소중립위원회 민간공동위원장 윤순진입니다. 2018년 시작된 한 EU 기후행동 사업이 3년 9개월여에 이르는 기간 동안 국내 다수 기관들과 기후행동 협력 관련 다양한 사업을 실시하고 금년 10월 성공적으로 종료하게 되는 것을 진심으로 축하드리며 기쁘게 생각합니다. 기후행동에 효과적으로 대응하고 국가와 지역을 아우르는 글로벌 기후협력을 제고하는 일의 중요성은 이제 국내에서도 그 공감대가 널리 형성되었으며 개인, 기업, 정부를 막론하고 가장 효과적이고 적절한 방법으로 협력해 나가기 위해 힘과 지혜를 모아나가고 있습니다. 이 같은 상황에서 대한민국과 유럽연합이 한 EU 기후행동 사업을 통해 에너지, 건물, 교통 등 다양한 분야에서 기후협력 사례와 정책을 공유하고
and the climate action between Korea and EU has been carried out, and this action was very timely, and also it is expected to serve as the best practice as well as a good example in promoting cooperation with various countries and regions in the future. As one of the largest GHG emitter, the EU has taken the path toward carbon neutrality. EU has also shared many innovative ideas and best practices to Korea for the promotions of 2050 carbon neutrality. In particular, as I have participated in Korea-EU climate action as the director of the Energy Transition Forum, today's closure event is very meaningful to me. Distinguished guests who are attending the closing event of the EU-Korea climate action, it is no longer a matter of choice but a duty of the present generation to protect clean planet and pass it as a sustainable Earth to our future generation. Fortunately, many countries around the world agree on the gravity of the climate change crisis caused by greenhouse gas emissions and urgency of taking actions. We are declaring our goal of carbon neutrality to reduce GHG emission as much as possible and reduce actual net emissions to zero through absorption or removal of unavoidable emitted GHG. Korea also declared bold path toward 2050 carbon neutrality. Until the target deadline, Korea will transform its industrial structure to realize 2050 carbon neutrality and also raise awareness to realize our common goal. 2050 Carbon Neutrality Committee will continue to make every effort to realize Korea's 2050 carbon neutrality goal and create sustainable and brighter future for our future generation. I'd like to ask all of you joining us today to pay special attention to the promotion of 2050 carbon neutrality and the work of the 2050 Carbon Neutrality Committee. Once again, congratulations on the successful completion of EU-Korea Climate Action Project. Based on the successful result of the Korea-EU Climate Action Project, I sincerely hope that climate cooperation between Korea and the EU will be further strengthened in the future. Thank you.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you.
말씀 잘 들었습니다.
Thank you for those warm remarks
시간을 내서 격려의
and sparing time out of your very busy schedule.
다음 축사로 넘어가도록
We'll move on to the next congratulatory remarks,
대전시 대덕
which will be delivered by Mr. Jeong-yeon Park, District Mayor of the Taedok District Government.
지역 에너지
Now, Taedok District work with our team in the local energy transition programs, and Mr. Park joins us online from Daejeon.
그럼 부청장님
Mr. Park, please.
네, 안녕하세요.
Or Miss Park.
예, 대전 대덕구 박정현 구청장입니다. 지난
Good afternoon. I'm
2018년도에
Jeong-yeon
발족된
Park,
한 이후
District
기후
Mayor
행동
of
사업이
Taedok
오늘
District
10월에
Government.
종료가 된다고 해서 저는 개인적으로
As we come
굉장히
to a close next month with the
많습니다.
Korea-EU Climate Action Initiative launched in
오늘 마지막
2018,
포럼 자리에 저희를
I feel somewhat
인사말씀
sad that we have to see an end to this program. And we are here to share the activity outcomes of participating entities and discuss ways to achieve carbon neutrality and further cooperation between Korea and EU. I wish to express my deepest gratitude to Mr. John Bogart, Deputy Head of the EU Delegation to the ROK, and I would also like to extend special thanks to all those who have made this event possible. The Korea-EU Climate Action Initiative, through cooperation between the two parties, has supported climate action projects of many entities in order to promote low carbon and green transition. This initiative has successfully completed its mission of encouraging climate action and for providing support for climate targets. Now, Taedok District has studied the European experience of energy transition to develop energy transition policies suited to our district. In January this year, an agreement was signed between the Korea-EU Climate Action Team and Daejeon Energy Transition Network, upon which it participated in 4 domestic expert workshops, 2 European expert workshops, and the International Conference on Korea-EU Local Energy Transition. Such activities were highly valuable in formulating local energy transition policies for our district. I thank you for your support. On the flip side, the local government workshop, held as part of a joint effort between Korea-EU Climate Action and the Local Government Association for Climate and Energy Transition, was an opportunity for Taedok to present to the foreign audience the district's energy transition programs. Today, Taedok's energy transition policies focus on the following: the Energy Committee and Local Energy Plan established pursuant to the Basic Ordinance for Green Growth, Local Energy Ordinance, the Executive Ordinance for Carbon Budget, the New and Renewable Energy Convergence Projects, Mini Solar PV Distribution Program, Energy Welfare Programs for Vulnerable Groups, Community-led Solar Generation Facilities, Energy Cafe, the RE100 Corporate Commitments, the Carbon Budget, apartments with zero usage of common electrical supply, 100,000 carbon dieters, among many other initiatives. The Korea-EU Climate Action Initiative shall serve as a springboard for our district in working to gradually adopt European successes in energy transition and achieve a Taedok-style energy transition. I'd like to once again thank the Action Team and the EU delegation for demonstrating remarkable passion on these issues. I will long remember this experience. I wish you all good health and best of luck.
정말 힘찬 말씀 너무 감사드립니다.
Thank you very much.
실제로 저희가 협력 사업을 최근까지
Well, we've been carrying out the cooperative project until recently, and
대덕구에서 실제로
we learned a lot from European cases, and I very much look forward how these ideas can put into practice. I hope that Daedokgu will continuously cooperate with the European cities. The opening remarks and congratulatory speeches have now been completed. We'll move on to the next order. As today is a closure event of the EU-Korea Climate Action Project, we have prepared a presentation that summarizes the activities of the project team. Before the presentation starts, we'll invite team leader Joachim Eisler to briefly listen to the performance of the business team and also their impressions of the closing the business. And after that, we'll also watch the video. Are you ready, Mr. Joachim?
Yes, I am. Thanks a lot, Sung-hee. Dear participants, colleagues and friends, today we come together really to celebrate to celebrate the achievements of our EU-Korea Climate Action Project. As you know, the project is funded by the European Union, was running about 3 years and 9 months, focusing on initiatives in the areas of renewable energy, energy efficiency, low carbon mobility, and also including the important topics of coal phase out and just transition, which are so important to Korea. And by doing so, we have worked closely and have actively engaged with local governments, civil society, the youth, academia, and the private sector. As John has mentioned in his opening remarks, our project has followed a so-called bottom-up approach, meaning that we have worked closely with those groups that I just mentioned, and therefore complementing the ongoing EU-Korea climate action level dialogue on the government level. Over the duration of the project, our team has organized a series of conferences, dialogues, and workshops, which all had one common objective, or one common thing in common, which was to provide a platform for practitioners, participants, and experts from Europe and from Korea to share their ideas, lessons learned, to establish contacts and linkages, and ultimately to develop initiatives and partnerships towards achieving climate neutrality. We will shortly show you also a video which nicely summarizes some examples of our work and key achievements of our project. Our entire team would like to take the opportunity to thank all of you, our Korean and our European partners, for the excellent cooperation. It has been truly a pleasure and a big privilege getting to know and working with you. And I think that we have all learned a lot from each other. Without your support and interest, it would have been impossible to put such a great program together and to achieve such positive results. We also would like to thank the EU, especially the EU delegation to Korea, as well as the EU Commission Directorate Generals for Climate Action and Energy for their generous support. Let me conclude by actively encouraging all of you to keep building, to follow up on the contacts and partnerships that our project has helped to either create or to strengthen between Europe and Korea in the area of climate action. While our project will be coming to an end at the beginning of October, the continued cooperation between Korea and Europe in the important and critical area of climate change will and must continue. Like all of you, I'm also looking forward towards the upcoming presentations and discussions, and like to give now the word back to Bong-hee in Seoul, sending you all many greetings from Europe. Thanks so much.
네, 팀장님 감사합니다. 사실은 저희 팀장님도
Thank you very much, Mr. Eisler. He should be here with us in person, but due to COVID pandemic, he wasn't able to come back to Korea. He joined us online from Germany. Another sorry and sad regret coming from the pandemic. Now, with that, I'd like to now show you a video covering the EU-Korea climate action activities. It is slightly under 5 minutes, so enjoy.
인류의 화석연료 사용으로 인한 지구온난화는 우리 삶과 지구 생태계의 가장 큰 위협이 되고 있습니다. 올해 8월 전 세계 과학자들은 20년 이내 지구 온도가 산업화 이전에 비해 1.5도 상승할 것이라고 전망했습니다. 기후위기를 피할 시간이 이제 얼마 남지 않았습니다. 한국은 세계 8위의 온실가스 배출국입니다. 온실가스 감축을 위한 한국의 노력은 기후위기 해결을 위해서 필요할 뿐만 아니라 아시아 국가 등 비슷한 발전 수준의 국가들에게 영향을 줄 수 있다는 점에서 매우 중요합니다. 기후행동과 에너지 전환의 글로벌 선두주자로서 유럽연합은 탄소 중립 사회를 향한 한국의 노력을 지원합니다.
Europe is ready to lead and we are also always ready to share. We're ready to share our ideas and strategies on climate action. Let's work together. You can count on Europe.
한EU 기후행동 사업은 유럽연합의 재정 지원으로 2018년 출범한 이후 지난 3년 9개월 동안 다양한 활동들을 진행해 왔습니다. 본 사업은 한국과 유럽연합의 교류와 협력을 통해 다양한 이해 당사자들의 기후행동을 촉진한다는 목표로 지방정부, 시민사회단체, 기업 등의 기후위기 대응 활동을 지원했습니다. 에너지, 건물, 교통 분야뿐만 아니라 그린 뉴딜, 탄소 중립 등 주요 기후 의제에 관한 논의를 활성화하고 전략을 모색하고자 했습니다. 사업팀은 자문회의, 대중행사, 공동연구 등을 통해 한국과 유럽연합 이해 당사자들의 대화와 학습 기회를 창출하고 교류와 협력을 강화했습니다. 재생에너지와 에너지 전환을 주제로 대덕구 지역에너지 전환 컨퍼런스, 에너지 전환 청년 프론티어 등의 사업을 수행했습니다. 한국의 건물 에너지 효율 정책 개발을 지원하고자 사회에 걸쳐 과제별 워크숍을 개최하고 유럽의 선진 사례들을 논의했습니다. 3회의 도시교통 포럼을 통해 유럽의 지속가능한 교통 정책을 공유하고 한국의 지방정부가 관련 정책을 수립할 수 있도록 지원했습니다. 유럽 그린딜, 녹색 금융 등 주요한 기후 주제에 대해 유럽과 한국의 현황을 살펴보고 해법을 모색했습니다. 협력기관과 공동으로 총 4건의 연구보고서, 9개의 영상교육 자료를 제작 배포함으로써 분야별 기후정책을 제안하고 인식 제고와 역량 강화를 도모했습니다. 사업 참가자들은 주제, 내용, 유럽 사례 공유 등의 측면에서 높은 만족도를 표시했습니다. 사업팀의 거둔 성과는 기후행동을 선도해온 한국과 유럽 협력기관들의 지원에 힘입은 바가 큽니다.
The EU-Korea Climate Action Project has played an important role in complementing government-level dialogue by engaging with and connecting essential actors. Let me highlight 2 recently completed initiatives. Together with the Korean Energy Transition Forum, the project organizes Second Youth Frontier Program, a capacity-building program helping young activists to become vocal actors in Korea's green energy transition. The project facilitated exchanges between Malmö, Sweden's cycling capital, and Jeong-yeon. In Malmö, already 25% of transport happens on bikes. While this project is coming to an end, climate action remains a key priority for EU-Korea cooperation. The challenge before us is greater than ever, and it's essential that the EU and Korea take the lead in addressing the climate crisis. We look forward to continuing our partnership, consolidating what we have already achieved, and to launching new initiatives, fostering local energy transition and promoting climate neutrality.
2050년 탄소 중립 달성을 위한 여정에서 한국과 유럽연합의 협력과 교류가 더욱 활발히 진행되기를 기대합니다.
네, 어떻게 보셨는지 궁금합니다.
Did you all enjoy the video?
저는 사업팀에 있었던 사람의 입장에서
I was a member of the team,
사실 뭐 3년 9개월
and it was
활동들을 5분 이내에
highly memorable, and it's a challenge to put 3 years and 9 months of work in a 4-minute video. Though short, I hope it effectively communicated the activities and outcomes of the initiative to our audience.
네, 그러면 본격적으로
With that, we will now move on to the presentations and discussion sessions.
저희 이제 이번 저희 행사가 저희 이제 사업팀 종료 행사라서 좀
Now, this is a closure event, so there are a lot of presentations. So there are 3 presentation sessions: the keynote session, the energy session, and building and mobility session.
첫 번째 기조 발제는
Now, as for the keynote speech,
유럽연합의 55% 감축
the presentation will cover the Fit for 55 package recently announced, and the second keynote speech will be on the Korea's climate neutrality scenarios and NDCs.
첫 번째 발표자는
Now, the first presenter for the keynote speech is Ms. Marta Olender, Policy Officer at DG CLIMA, European Commission. She joins us from Brussels. Ms. Olender, ready when you're ready.
Thank you, Jung-hee, and good afternoon, everyone, and good morning from Brussels. My name is Marta Olender. I'm a policy coordinator for international relations at the European Commission Directorate for Climate Change. And I'm very, very pleased and very honored to be part of this closing event of the project that I have been involved in from the very beginning, in fact, from its conception phase. So it makes me very proud to see how far it has come and how much we achieved through this project. I would like to focus today on presenting to you the recently announced package of EU policies, which are part of our European Green Deal. The package is called Fit for 55. The 55 number stands for the ambition level we are aiming in terms of emission reductions by 2030. But I would like to start by saying a few words about why we're doing this and why Commission has come up with this proposal. So shortly after we just completed the legislative work on our previous 2030 target, which was the -40 target. We're doing this, of course, because of the urgency of climate action. And we have heard a lot already this morning and this afternoon in Seoul about the really worrying events we've been observing this summer and previous years all over the world. Of course, just recently, there has been another work from the International Panel on Climate Change, which reconfirms that the action has to take, the action on climate has to speed up dramatically if we want to stay below 1.5 degrees Celsius. Of course, this year there is a very important COP26 in Glasgow. We think this COP is of critical importance. It's only a few weeks away. It's the place and time where we really need parties to come with new ambitions when it comes to their NDCs, which are the 2030 commitments under the Paris Agreement, and with the long-term strategies, which set them on a pathway to climate neutrality by 2050, if possible. So it is in this context that the EU has decided to accelerate its action. It's also part of our climate law, which has recently been adopted last June. So becoming climate neutral in 2050 has become a legal obligation for the EU. This is also our contribution to the COP26 through our nationally determined contribution. And of course, that 55 becomes our new target for 2030. We have a tradition, those who've been following developments in the EU know that we have a tradition of having ambitious targets on climate from the beginning, from Kyoto Protocol to the Paris Agreement, but we are also delivering on our targets. So we are not just taking commitments, but we are also making sure that there is the legislation and the necessary policy to deliver those targets on the ground. With the recent package of policies, the climate law that I just mentioned, and the European Green Deal, Europe will become the first climate neutral continent by 2050. This target, and of course, this also includes the increased ambition by 2030. One element of this new target is also that it's legally binding at the international level, but also domestically. One of the important reasons why we think it's possible to go beyond the current targets and to do even more on climate action in the EU is that our experience so far is showing that emission reductions are compatible with growth. And this slide shows very well the trend of our emissions from 1990 and the trend of our GDP growth. So you can very clearly see what we call there is a decoupling between growth and the emissions, and this decoupling will, of course, continue at an even faster pace with this new ambition by 2030, and will help us reach ultimately the climate neutrality in 2050. But we also think these new targets are compatible not only with growth, but they are also good for citizens. And our evidence shows that achieving the 55 emission reductions by 2030 would really be good for our business. It would be good for our industry. It would really spur sustainable economic growth. And of course, the word sustainable is very important here. It will also accelerate the clean energy transition, but it will also improve the well-being of the EU citizens. And because there is a very close connection between reducing emission and co-benefits in terms of improved health, of course, air quality, which is a very big challenge in many parts of the world, and more broadly, general degradation in general. So in this slide, we're seeing how broad the challenge ahead of us is and how broad the scope of this Fit for 55 package is, of the proposals that we just put on the table last summer. You will see it's really covering a very broad spectrum of policies and regulation from taxation and trade to energy, to transport, to climate. It really has to be a mainstreaming of climate across all the EU policies, or most of the EU policies. What we see here is the specific policy proposals that we have put in place. I will not, we don't have time to speak about all of them today, but I would like to just focus on a few that have been really critical and that are at the center of the proposal in the next years to come. Starting with the emission trading system of the EU. It has been in the EU really a central piece of our climate policies until now. It has so far helped us achieve 43% cut of the greenhouse gas emissions, of all our greenhouse gas emissions. It's been in place since 2005. And the scope currently covers the power and the heat generation, energy intensive industrial sectors, and aviation within Europe. So only the flights which are starting and finishing within Europe. One of the key elements of the emission trading system, and I believe this is probably well known to the Korean counterparts, because you also have an emission trading system. So one of its key elements, it's a market stability reserve, which helps us stabilize the market and remove a surplus allowances. There has recently been a reform of our ETS already, which has helped us strengthen the market stability reserve, and it has strengthened the price of an allowance per ton. Recently, it has been in a very high range, reaching to almost 55, 60 euros a ton. But we still believe that it's important for this new increased ambition by 2030. If we want to achieve this, it's important to strengthen the emission trading system even further. So we will be tackling all the elements of the emission trading system. It will include stronger reduction of the cap, increase in the reduction, one overall removal of 117 million tons, further reforms of the market stability reserve, but importantly, it will also include new sectors. So for the first time, we will have a separate scheme for maritime transport, road transport, and heating and cooling in buildings. So just to say, this will be the building, and the road will have its own separate scheme. So this new scheme for road transport and building, why are we doing this? It's because those sectors are the two sectors in the EU where the emissions are well, they're still growing, or it's not easy to reduce them as fast as we would hope so. And they're very important sectors, of course, to achieve climate neutrality and stronger targets by 2030. It's important to add that it will not start immediately. So it will probably not start before 2026. And it's also very important, it will not target households and cars drivers, so not the individuals, but the fuel suppliers. So that's a very important element. And in order to make to help address the challenges that may arise from this new proposal, we are also proposing to put in place a new social climate fund, which will be operating precisely to address the challenges in those two sectors, in the most vulnerable groups. And the funding will be coming from partially from the incomes from the allowances under the ETS. The other very important part of our package, as we call it, and of the EU policies is the effort sharing regulation. What does it mean? It's the part of the emissions that is not currently covered by the ETS. So currently it includes road transport, heating, agriculture, waste management, and small industrial installations. So those that are not covered by the ETS. And it's really a division of those remaining division emission reduction among the member states. So previously, our target was to achieve 29% emission reductions in those sectors, but we're also increasing this target to go to at least 40%. I would like to show how it looks like per country. So the yellow represents the blue. Sorry, represents the current targets that the member states have, and the green represents basically the additional 11% that will be added with this new proposal. What is also showing, this graph is showing, is that the targets are not exactly the same among the member states, and that's also part of the solidarity within the EU, because basically those targets are linked to the in short, to the GDP of the country. So the country with the highest GDP has the strongest and the highest targets. Carbon pricing, of course, it's a very important part of our policies, but we believe this would not be enough to achieve our targets and our ambition. We need to combine it with a regulation for specific sectors. And as I mentioned, transport is one of the sectors where we still we see the need for stronger action. So in terms of specific targets for cars, we will be also gradually increasing and quite strongly increasing the targets in terms of CO2 reduction for cars and vans, with the objective of reaching net zero emissions for cars and vans in 2035 already. This, of course, has to come with some other adjustments and reform. And one of the really important elements is to increase the number of charging stations, and you can see also how much in numbers we are planning to increase those. So from 1 million in 2025 in Europe to 16 million in 2050. So that's a very, very strong increase as well. Of course, the energy, and this project was very much looking at the energy aspects, energy efficiency and energy renewables. We had many experts from the EU engaging with the counterparts in Korea. So probably you know that we already have quite ambitious targets in the renewable, in our energy mix, which is 40%. But we believe it's important to set the benchmark even higher, and that will be 40% in the overall energy mix in the renewables. stepping up from 32, and for the renewables in buildings specifically, it will be even higher. It will be 49% for buildings. There is also, of course, targets for energy efficiency, and again, they would be increased. And currently, we have a legislation which is putting us on a pathway to reach 32% energy efficiency target, but we want that to be increased to 39 in primary energy consumption and 36 in final energy consumption. The other very important element of our new policy package, of course, is strengthening the carbon removals. This has a very important role in absorbing the remaining emissions that cannot be reduced through other policies. This will be done as well gradually. So the current target which we have, it actually has a specific number of millions of tons that we want to reduce by 2025. It will remain in place, and the new targets will be increased gradually between 2026 and 2030. Overall, we are aiming for the entire sector of the land use, forestry, and agriculture to become climate neutral quite soon. One of the elements that has been attracting a lot of attention of our proposals relates to the carbon border adjustment mechanism. This proposal is coming from thinking that while the EU is taking our ambition action, we believe that more ambitious action is needed in other parts of the world. Of course, this is happening in many parts of the world, but not everywhere, and not everywhere to the level that is needed to keep the temperatures below 1.5 degrees. So we believe that with proposing such a measure, we will encourage our partners to implement more ambitious policies, and in particular, carbon pricing mechanism that will help in achieving greater emission reductions in other parts of the world. We also believe this will help to avoid the risk of carbon leakage, because what we wouldn't like to see is that emissions in one part of the world are being reduced, but they're being transferred to another part of the world. And we also believe that with a mechanism like that, we will help equalize the price of the carbon between domestic and important products in the EU. So key elements of this proposal of the carbon border adjustment mechanism I would like to highlight is that it will mirror the price of the carbon in the EU through an import mechanism. It will also complement, it will not replace, but it will complement the EU emissions trading system. It will focus on carbon intensive sectors that will be shown in the next slide. And very importantly, it will be fully compatible with the WO in its design. So the sectors were, of course, selected the ones that are the most energy intensive, as I just said. So it's a cement, iron and steel, aluminium, fertilizers, and electricity. I will start moving a bit faster because I believe my time is running out. To achieve all of that, it has to be matched with equal level of ambition in terms of funding, of course. So none of this can be achieved if there is no funds available across the board and in all the policy sectors that we've just mentioned. And with this in mind, we in the EU, we have designed our European budget for the next 7 years, but as together with the Next Generation EU, which is the funding that has been put in place as the recovery to accelerate the recovery from COVID. And together, all together, those fundings will be earmarked for climate mainstreaming. So meaning that 30% and in some cases even 37% of the funding will have to be dedicated for the projects that are aiming at climate neutrality. So altogether, that will amount to as much as 1.8 trillion euro in the 7 years framework. But there are also other funds which are more targeted, I would say, towards, for example, the modernization fund, which is very important to support energy transition and modernization of energy systems in those member states. It's about 10 member states with the lower GDP per capita. And then there's also the innovation fund, which is one of the biggest in the world innovation fund, helping with deploying very promising and very innovative low carbon innovation, the projects that are in the demonstration phase. And those two funds will be strengthened. They are existing, but they will be strengthened in this new proposals as well. I spoke about this a little bit already in the beginning, that this transition has to be fair. So all those funds, including the new social climate fund that I already mentioned in the context of the ETS reform, and as well as the division of effort between the member states, is part of an effort to make this transition socially fair and also address inequality and especially the energy poverty issues through climate action specifically. So some of those elements, like the social climate fund, are new, while the others have been in place already for some years. One last thing I would like to say is, of course, the EU cannot solve the climate crisis alone, and we only represent about 8 to 9% of the global emissions. And even if we increase our emission, as we are already doing by 2030, it will still not be enough for the global warming to remain below 1.5 degrees and not even below 2 degrees, which are the Paris Agreement targets. So we really want to motivate other countries to do. We want to showcase what we are doing, and we want to share our experience with other partners and with other countries. That's why we're looking forward to working with partners. We're looking forward to working with stakeholders in Korea, with the government in Korea. We believe that together we can really join forces and become the leaders of green transition and transition towards climate neutrality. And I believe a project like that, it's a really good example of how this can be done, how we can bring our experts together, how we can share our experience, and how we can mobilize action on the ground. And so we're looking forward to working closely with all of you in this really, really important time this year and beyond. And I'll stop here. Thank you. Thank you very much.
네, 감사합니다. 마르타 올렌더
Thank you, Policy Officer Marta Olender.
저희 한 EU 기후행동 사업팀을 주관하고
Well,
있는 집행위원회에서
she helped us, and she's working at the important organizations that has given us a lot of help. Especially, she talked about EU's upgraded climate goals and various implementation measures and EU plans to achieve these goals. Thank you so much. As she mentioned, Korea wishes to set out more ambitious goals, and we very much look forward to that. Let me introduce the second speaker. Second speaker is Executive Member Lee Sung-ho of Energy Transition Forum. Mr. Lee Sung-ho also serves as a Senior Research Fellow at the Energy Technology Assessment Service. Executive Director Lee Sung-ho participated as a key researcher in the Strategy and Policy for 2050 Carbon Neutrality Research Project, which was jointly conducted with our team. In relations with that team, he will summarize the strategy and policies. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Lee Sung-ho. Hello everyone, I was just introduced by the moderator. I am Executive Member Lee Sung-ho. August 31st, In order to respond to the climate crisis, we have legislated a special act to respond to the climate crisis. Last October, President of Republic of Korea has declared that Korea aims to achieve 2050 carbon neutrality. And August 31st of this year, once again, the goal has become a legislated goal. So Korea is the 14th around the world to officially declare carbon neutrality 2050 as a law as well as our ambitious goal. The title of my presentation today is Current Status and Suggestion for Carbon Neutrality Scenario in Korea, which was announced officially. So it's a brief introduction of the scenario and also my view. And also there are two tasks that we've been discussing within the Energy Transition Forum. We have declared 3 scenarios. And if you look at this chart, the greenhouse gas emission, you can see that we have come up with the 3 scenarios. Of course, the CCUS, the opinion of CCUS reduction is not proven yet. It's not a fully verified technology. So due to the fact that it has not been proven technology, maybe this scenario might be achievable or not. And there were 6 projects conducted focusing on CCUS, but actually it was proven to be a failure. United States has carried out this CCUS project in Texas, but it came out as failure. So in Norway, there's another project to test CCUS, but still it's not proven technology. So we don't know whether CCUS application is a desirable idea or not. If you look at this slide, it shows the energy demand for 2050 in the Carbon Neutrality Commission scenario. The first thing that we must consider is, of course, energy demand. We need to enhance the efficiency of energy consumption. But 2050, you can say, compared to the 2018, it is expected to decrease merely 0.3% to 2.9% from the emissions in 2018. And according to each country's scenario, including IEA, it includes the emission reductions of 30 to 50%. So we must also reduce 30 to 50% compared to 2018. So this is the opinions, which means that either we don't have any ambitions to do so or willingness to do so, or it seems as if we don't have any alternative. Second opinion is that the proportions of hydrogen is too high. Hydrogen should only be used when there's no other alternative. Hydrogen is not an energy source. It should be regarded as a carrier. But without any way to do so, we came up with this scenario that we will rely heavily on the hydrogen. So once again, can we really rely on hydrogen as much as possible? Of course, politically, the government has declared hydrogen economy and the electricity generation and even vehicle, hydrogen will be used. So from the energy side, there are a lot of things that is really hard for us to understand. Now, let's look at the power demand. As you can see from this slide, yes, we have announced NDC. And if you look at here, the CCUS is also about 200 kilowatts. And once again, if we reduce the usage of the hydrogen, yes, the productions of the hydrogen can also be reduced, which means that we need a lot of CCUS. But by eliminating the fossil fuel usage, we need to deploy a tactic that minimizes the use of CCUS technology. We need to enhance renewable energy. So this was the view that I'd like to emphasize on. As I mentioned, until now, there are challenges and suggestions. First of all, in the power sector, the ratio of the final energy compared to the primary energy, yes, we can definitely achieve the energy consumptions, because if you look at the existing energy, the expansions of the electrifications of the public transportation can reduce energy consumption by 1/3 to 1/4. So for the energy efficiency, definitely we need to take actions. Now, in the transportation sector, public transportation must be increased. In case of the vehicle, electrification is a must. And 3 to 5 times electrifications of the public transportations, it's much, much better. And the people's mobility or the goods transportations, only when we truly need, then we can use the electrifications of the public transportation. Now, regarding the building sector, cooling and heating takes about 60% of the emissions from the building. But we are not just using the electricity, but if we use the heat pump, then we can definitely reduce the demand to 1/3 to 1/5. So electrifications of the building energy consumption storage can be used when renewable energy remains. Now, industrial sector, there are many things. First, cement, steel. There are no countries in the whole world that consumes and produce more than Korea does. And, well, people will move to the area where the energy is cheap. I mean, geopolitically, people will do that. So global steel and chemical industry will move to their production base to the areas where renewable energy is accessible and rich. So we cannot just bring steel from the area, but rather we will remove our production site. So solar power, we are already doing that. And metallurgical steel is now being used, 4959s. We are taking advantage of that, and I believe that we will also do that. So energy forecast solely for the steel and cement and chemical product consumed in Korea is necessary. Yes, and there are room for the reductions, and also in the industrial sector, in conclusion, energy consumption can be reduced, and we need tactic and strategy. And within the carbon scenario, we must reflect that. And if we do that, definitely, we can reduce by 30 to 50% of the energy consumption. Now, hydrogen usage. Yes, I have already told you that we need to minimize the use of the hydrogen, because hydrogen is not an energy source, but it's a carrier. And hydrogen, the renewable energy, it's a secondary energy. It's not a final energy source. It's only a secondary energy that we use to generate the energy. And also in the industry, we use hydrogen. And also, once again, it's only energy carrier. There's no reason why we focus so much on the hydrogen. Of course, we use hydrogen, but we rely more on the hydrogen. Hydrogen is produced from the renewable energy, and the efficiency is about 60%, but hydrogen usage is nearly 30%. So if we use gas, what should we use? Definitely, of course, the complex hydrogen usage is much better. So in the generation as well, do we have division? Not much. But why is it include so much? Well, it's because of the fuel cell usage. But fuel cell, we don't produce that domestically. We import that from the States, from the United States. And now, in case of the vehicle, the EV, well, if we produce in a cheap way, we can enjoy the benefit, but hydrogen fuel cell car cannot be cheaper than electric vehicle because production is very complicated. We need fuel, and we also need a generator and battery. Everything must be equipped within the hydrogen fuel car. So it's much more complicated than EV. So we must minimize the domestic hydrogen consumptions, and as much as possible, we believe that EV is better than hydrogen, and also the aircraft or long-distance operating ships. Instead of just relying heavily on the hydrogen, we need to find a way. And For the special transportation, hydrogen cannot be even compared, and artificially including hydrogen for our scenario is problematic. Now, you know, the hydrogen is mostly used for the fertilizer, and by reducing the usage of the fertilizer, we wouldn't be using much of the hydrogen. So, once again, in order to reduce CCUS, there's no way but to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions that are generated from the fossil fuel. During the past 2 decades, I've been working in the energy sector. I've witnessed many things, and we don't have any special technology development so far, and I don't see any further development in the energy technology in CCUS. EU, United States, Korea, in Boryong and in another area, we do have that, but still the result is obvious. So no matter how many countries focuses on the CCUS, the best way is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I mean, there's no way for us to handle more than 90% of the fossil fuel gas greenhouse gas emissions. There is a CCUS Global Institute. If you look at their homepage, only 2% of the greenhouse gas emissions are being stored, captured, and being addressed. And they use an observer called Amin, and they transport that, and then they capture that, and then the carbon dioxide is captured, and then this carbon dioxide capture is being contracted. So if we multiply that 80%, 90%, even it's processed, still the final percentage is merely 60%. So more than 80-90% of the greenhouse gas emission cannot be addressed by CCUS. So once again, the best way to reduce GHG is reducing the greenhouse gas emission. And for the benefit of the fossil fuel usage, there's no reason for us to rely on the CCUS because once again, it's very expensive. It creates additional greenhouse gas emission. From now, I'd like to introduce the cooperative projects between the Energy Transition Forum and EU-Korea Climate Actions. There is a forum called Youth Frontier. The Energy Transition Youth Frontier is a field-type problem-solving activity in which young people directly identify the energy transition problems in our society, and they raise their voices. In the process of that, the youth can present their great ideas, and in the end, we can find clues to solving problems. In the process, the youth can develop themselves as the expert working in the climate crisis area. Last year, 2050 carbon neutrality strategies and the task were identified, and we've been doing the work together. And in many areas, I was told that the report is being read. Well, I keep getting the message that I should finish my presentation, and the moderator is already standing in front of the podium, so I must conclude. Now, this is the proposals of the future EU-Korea cooperation agenda. Korea is regarded as an advanced country, but still, we are getting funding from EU, and I have a mixed feeling. We are in a position to donate or to contribute, but it is regrettable that we are recipient of the help from the EU. And the climate crisis is a common challenge that we need to tackle together. Of course, there is a gap between those who have the capacity and those who don't. And I truly agree that we need to collaborate. In light of that, we are truly grateful for the funding and the support given by the EU. However, we need to focus on enhancing our capacity. We hope that we can also become the contributor, helping other countries. And the programs that we've been doing so far is very meaningful, I believe, in many aspects. And I sincerely hope that these projects can be continuously be carried out, because based on these projects, we have learned a lot, and also we were able to identify methodology. So there was a huge implication for us. And once again, so I sincerely hope, as the President mentioned, we hope to become the leading nation in tackling the climate crisis. And I hope that Korea can become the initiator of solving the climate crisis. That concludes my presentation. Thank you very much. Once again, please give a warm round of applause. Thank you so much. Well, he summarized the current status and suggestions for the carbon neutrality scenarios in Korea and how we can strengthen the energy efficiency and minimize the use of the fossil fuels. And also, he has introduced the research report. And if you get access to our website, you can upload the result of the report in English as well as in Korean. Now that we have had the time to listen to the climate goals, we will go to the next session.
The first session will cover the energy sector. We have three presenters. The first presenter is Sung-hee, Manager of Energy Transition Team of Green Korea United. She worked with our team and German institutions to address ways to deal with conflicts. And based on those achievements and outcomes, she will cover ways to deal with renewable energy conflict and public acceptance issues. Yes, I'd like to talk about measures to increase renewable energy and improve public acceptance. There are other organizations outside of Green Korea United that have done research on perceptions toward renewable energies. About 80 to 90% of Koreans feel that energy transition is necessary, that we need to introduce more renewables into our energy mix. In order to achieve the 2050 carbon neutrality, we would require some more dedication coming from renewable energies. It said that we require about 500 additional gigawatts of renewable energy capacity. In 2015, it was 3.5 gigawatts, but in order to achieve RE100, we need additional 17 gigawatts a year. There was a lot of conflict surrounding the 3.5 gigawatt renewable energy. So with 17 gigawatts, we would anticipate more intense social conflicts. So we need to prepare ourselves, brace ourselves for potential conflicts among stakeholders in the future. If you look at the location research, you notice that there are a lot of regulatory issues, market visibility factors that have to be taken into account in deciding the location. And generally, the public acceptance about this location with regard to renewables is there, but the renewable energies have not spread or did not take off as quickly as we have anticipated, because there are a lot of issues with the grid connection, and there are a lot of protests and opposition on site. If you look at the issues concerning location for renewable energy facilities, it has to do with issues such as whether on-farm PV should be introduced, or whether wind farms or wind turbines are more desirable over PVs in terms of environmental issues and protection, conservation matters. And for offshore wind farms, what will be the clearance with the coastal line, how do you address bird collisions and protection of coastal waters. All of these are important environmental issues. If you actually go on the sites, the local committee members express a lot of discontent with the policies. They say that everything has been decided in advance and they just notify us at the last minute without any prior consultations. Why were we taken out of the decision-making process? The residents of this location should be able to voice their concerns. And also the outside players are monopolizing the project, mostly oriented towards power generation for large cities at the expense of the rural villages. So this was a discontent among the residents and stakeholders, and there was a lack of or an absence of an organization to mediate such conflicts. You see this picture is an example of a conflict in Cheongsong, Myeonbong Mountain, and there's another example of a conflict that happened on site, the wind farms in the area of Yeong-yeon. Of course, conflicts were there, and we have worked to introduce a lot of programs to resolve such conflicts. For the Southeast offshore wind, we've discussed with the villagers over many years to identify a model for coexistence between offshore wind and the fisheries industry. And we also created the K-esteem model taken from the European esteem model, which invites private sector experts. So we worked with the conflict resolution organization in Europe and put together a workshop to learn about the German cases of conflict and the approaches they take on to address those conflicts. In 2025, by 2025, Germany's target is 40% renewable energy out of the the total energy mix. And their target is 65 for renewable energies in the power sector. Now, many considerations taken into place: how to protect the harbor purpose, protect the endangered species, red kites, the landscape issues, and how to protect the World Heritage Sites, the clearance with the roads. And I just mentioned that the red kite is an endangered species, and if renewable energy facilities would have a negative impact on the protection of these endangered species, then the design phase would require special approval processes. And for wind films, in order to minimize negative impact on the harbor purpose, many guidelines were being formulated and put into place. And clearance issues and various regulations placed on new buildings were also taken into account in the process of selecting locations. Yet conflicts were still there. They weren't completely resolved, so there was a need to establish a dedicated organization. And such a center was created under the federal government's support. Of course, operations will be self-sufficient and independent. It was created in 2016 to address 2016 and worked on over 100 cases of conflicts, assessed to be quite successful. In conducting the workshops with German counterparts, the lessons we learned was this: that renewable energy expanding or proliferating quickly in Germany, but they had a very important principle in mind, the preventive principle. In other words, when it comes to renewable energy facilities and programs to respond to climate crisis and biodiversity conservation, all of these have to be aligned with one another in the process of further expanding renewable energy in the energy mix. And they create a dedicated organization to address potential conflicts in the process of achieving such targets in the renewable energy sector. Well, transition to renewable energy in Korea basically deals with a local energy transition. And if you look at the local government's plans, the level of self-sufficiency or wind power generation in the 17 local governments were very low in level. And also their level of preparedness or planning was also insufficient. So the way forward is to further enhance the self-sufficiency and the increase in share of PV and wind in these regional locations to further promote renewable energies. Environmental issues, democracy, distributed energy systems would all have to be respected to preempt potential conflicts. And it would be all the better to preempt such conflicts, and an organization dedicated to resolving such conflicts would be important. And a site would have to meet all the regulations for site requirements. And already damaged areas should be the target locations for renewable energies. And if that is insufficient, then we'll consider broadening out a bit further. And as mentioned earlier, distributed energy systems is an important step and phase in the process of achieving energy self-sufficiency. In the rural villages, the villagers believe that they're the ones paying a price to deliver energy to large cities. So the energy sufficiency issue in the local areas should be run by the residents and the villagers. And always think about for whom the energy transition in the local regions are intended for in the process of increasing renewable energy share. And let me talk about what we've done as part of the Korea-EU Climate Action Project. Well, there are two basic projects. One had to do with the studies on resolving conflict related to sites for renewable energies. I talked about this just now, so I'll skip it. And second was another meaningful program. Across 2019 and 2020, we held a green conference on the topic of the witness of climate crisis. We talked about the witness testimonies on issues confronting a carbon-addicted society. This was a new format. We invited a lot of farmers, sea divers, rescue mission experts. Ms. Helena Norberg-Hodge, who joined us from Denmark, all took part in the Green Conference. These were in the format of witness testimonies. It was a very valid means of communicating. Carbon neutrality was well received. And owing to the support coming from the climate action team between UN and Korea, we were able to experience such remarkable events. We're very happy to be a part of it. Thank you very much. Thank you. Let us give her a big hand. That was Ms. Sung-hee Lim, Manager of Energy Transition Team of Green Korea United. He talked about some issues that have to be taken into account in deciding locations, distributed systems, democracy, and other conflict resolution mechanisms very important. Now, with that, let us invite our second speaker.
Second speaker is a research planner, Jeong-pil, Energy and Climate Policy Institute for Just Transition. The title of his presentation is Coal Phase Out and Just Transition. In the process of preparing Just Transition for Chungnam, workshop was held to share cases of German Ruhr regions with the Buffetal Research Institute. He has participated in our project and established Just Transition plan for Chungnam. He also took part in various ways. Please, ladies and gentlemen, welcome him. Hello, everyone. I am Jeong-pil. Well, I believe I shouldn't be here, but rather Chungnam Provincial Researcher or from the Chungnam Provincial Government Office must be here. But since I took part in the research, on behalf of Chungnam Province, I'm here. Well, 2017 is a landmark year for Chungnam Province because all the policy paradigm has been shifted. In the past, there were around 30 coal power plants, and in order to minimize the damage from the coal power plants and also to increase the compensation, they have come up with a new policy. Of course, afterward, energy transition, just transitions, and climate crisis response, all of these came into being. 2016, the NGO nationwide and also within Chungnam area, there's a Chungnam energy transition. They have raised their voices and their needs were met. And also, the plan was set out by the official offices and various workshops, conferences were held. And also, the contents become more widely known. So this shows the energy transition plans that we have come up with. So in this process, what are important? Well, how many coal power plants should be abolished and how much dust should be, air pollution should be eradicated. As you know, in rural area, there are coal power plants. And the energy dependency as well as their livelihood heavily depend on the coal-fired plant. And also the government policy and demands of the Chungnam and civil society, because early shutdown of the coal power plants once again raised many issues, but we came into consensus that coal power plants gave a negative impact, and we began to carry out various research. If you look at the right side table, it shows that the power plant is really outdated and we need to shut them down. The yellow one is the power plant that has been operated for more than 30 years, and also the other part shows the coal-fired power generation, which takes about 30% of this area. So concerns for this area is unknown yet. But still, it is regrettable that we could not reach a consensus nor a compromise in this area. Now, let me dive deeper into the Chungnam Just Energy Transition Policy. What were the results of our research? In this process, central government took action very quickly because the request to come up with a just transition policy were already made, and in Chungnam area we began to accept this, and central government recently, the Carbon Neutrality Committee, in the name of the energy just transition, began to accept this plan. So it was actually bottom-up process. If you look at Chungnam area, many projects are being carried out. First thing was they came up with the law, and then they secured funds to implement the social dialogue programs on just transitions, and much faster than the National Assembly or central government. They have established the just transition funds to support just transitions of the regions to be impacted by the energy transition process. And also, the Carbon Neutrality Committee is focused on the decarbonization, and Chungnam made policy proposals to the Presidential Committee on the Carbon Neutrality as well. So there are two things that I'd like to focus on, and EU-Korea cooperation, as you can see, together with the Bong-hee, key expert, we have come up with a plan. Chungnam Energy Transitions and Chungnam Provincial Government, we met and we visited Europe, and we plan to carry out field work. But you know that COVID-19 broke out, so we couldn't visit Europe, and it became almost impossible. So we abolished the plan to visit Europe. It's regrettable. I mean, it could have been a great opportunity if we visit European countries and hear the EU cases. So we have launched the second project. The Chungnam's 2020 International Conference on Coal Phase Out in response to climate crisis conferences were held, and where we have invited the speakers from the European Union, and we had a chance to hear EU initiative for coal regions in transition. It was the conference was held in 2019, and we had the heightened interest in the carbon neutrality and also energy transitions, and in a way, sharing the EU keys and their implications was very meaningful to all of us. Second thing we did was we carried out the workshop for just transition policy development. As you can see here in the photo, we invited the German institute called the Pivotal Research Institute. We have invited the director, and we heard about their policies and also their practices, and also based on that we were able to carry out feasibility study. Unfortunately, it was a virtual online meeting, but still these workshops were very helpful to us. Next, what were the results? Well, Chungnam Province, we came up with a principle and strategy for Chungnam's just transition policy. And in a way, we learned the cases from Europe, including Germany, and we are a follower, but we were able to overcome any trials and errors that European countries underwent, because For example, if European countries took 5 years to carry out their plans, Chungnam province took only 3 years. We had systematic structure. However, there are also shortcomings. We did it in a very quick manner, but the researchers from the Chungnam province, and also we had to gather opinions from the stakeholders, and we weren't able to fully reflect the opinions of the stakeholders like local communities, labor unions, etc. We couldn't do that. However, we are still making efforts to gather the views. In the future, I believe that these are our remaining tasks. Next. What about the central government? I'm sure that you know already. Central government has announced the comprehensive plan for the Korean New Deal, and also they have announced the just labor transition support measures. In July, they have announced the second version of the Korean New Deal, which encompasses the just labor transition. It is also said that the just labor transition support measures came too late, but still, it's great that we have that. Still, there are things that is regrettable. Stakeholders couldn't join in the process of the decision making. And once again, we regard this as a shortcoming, but still, each regions, they came up with a strategy to decarbonize and also to phase out the coal power plant. And I believe in that sense, these processes were very meaningful. The Carbon Neutrality Committee presented few ideas, and Executive Member Lee Sung-hee already talked about that, but overall reductions of the GHG is important. But if you look at the carbon neutrality scenario, it states crystal clearly in 4 ways. And of course, numeric goal is important, but at the same time, NDC must follow, but I guess we couldn't come up with more upgraded NDC. Now we have the act, and what should we do from now? Of course, the carbon neutrality itself is NDC, but if you look at the right column of my slide, you can see that EU-Korea climate actions, how can we strengthen that? And I believe that my point could be quite similar. So instead of talking about other things, I'll focus only 2 things. What should be our next step? Of course, all of you need to actively take part in, but the labor union or the social organizations or resident group must take part in. And we need to also invite partners around the world, and in a way, multi-layered stakeholder participation is critical. Second, you know that Korea is divided into North and South Korea. Considering that not only South Korea but also North Korea should take part in to achieve energy just transitions and carbon neutrality. And I wish that the day comes when both Korea can take part in this scenario. That concludes my presentation. Thank you. Thank you very much. Please give a warm round of applause. Chungnam's just transition plan, including coal phase out, how they are doing it, and what are the limitations and shortcomings were well explained. Personally, I believe that all of these plans can be well carried out so that other local entities can learn from Chungnam province.
With that, we'll invite the last presenter for the energy session. Secretary General Jeong-yeon Park of the Local Government Association for Climate and Energy Transition. As the District Mayor Park mentioned earlier, our team has carried out various projects to assess the local governments, including workshops, and as part of educational materials for the local governments, we created a video. So Secretary General Park will talk about or enlighten us on the efforts made by local governments for carbon neutrality and energy transition. Good afternoon. My name is Jeong-yeon Park, Secretary General for Local Government Association for Climate and Energy Transition. We were formed in December of 2016. In the summer of that year, as Mr. Lee, who just previously mentioned, The mayor of the city of Gangjin in South Chungcheong province said that of the 60 coal-fired power plants in the nation, there are about 10 in Gangjin. And back then, the coal-fired power plants and the nuclear power plants were part of the government's policies for expansion. So the mayor of Gangjin says that there are 10, including steel mills, and they could no longer tolerate additional fossil fuel plants. So in the summer of 2016, he protested by fasting in the heart of the city here in Seoul. That has become a buzzword and initiated sympathetic visits by the heads of other local governments. And that served as the springboard for decarbonization and denuclearization efforts to be launched at the local government level. And there were joint commitment to pursue the local government's drive to achieve these goals. So in the original founding declaration, the nuclearization and decarbonization, distributed energy, local energy transition concepts were already included in the declaration. And our association requires a commitment of the head of the local government, report to the parliament, and then get approval to become a member of our association. So you need the commitment and parliamentary approval, which is actually a cumbersome process. So the policies the head of local government desires to implement requires approval or endorsement by a lot of other stakeholders. So that is why it has highly actionable momentum to it. Currently, it covers 45 local governments and heads of these governments. And we engage in a number of different activities, expanding solar, renewable energy, and other projects that engage the local community as well. And we take pride in a particular pet project among our many value projects. Last year on June 5th, we carried out a climate crisis declaration together with the many local governments. I mulled over the language to include in the declaration, but it is indeed my pet project, and I was very proud to come up with this statement. Not many were interested in climate crisis, but we talked about how we have established a target to curb temperature rise by 1.5 degrees. And I mulled over whether to mention 1.5 degrees curb or to use the term carbon neutrality. But we wanted to have something more impactful. And we believe that 1.5 degrees had stronger language. So that was the verbal structure that it utilized in the declaration. And the 26 heads of local government signed on, or 126. Initially, I thought about 50 would suffice, but practically all of the local government heads joined in and put their handcock on the document. Now, the 2026 local government heads were really thinking about how to achieve these climate targets and what to include in a declaration of a climate emergency, which has been made in June of 2020. We researched English language materials that were open for public access and looked at those that were aligned with our situation and tried to eliminate those conflicting factors, especially those that were against achieving carbon neutrality, and included those that could be carried out at the local level. We believe that those activities are still valid today. And energy transition portion was asked to be more specific. So of the many activities, I brought with me one activity as an example. And as Mr. Lee has mentioned, there's a carbon support center to be established in the local communities for the realization of carbon neutrality. Now, these centers will become the hub to respond to climate crisis, energy transition, and reduce emissions and climate adaptation. These will be the focus of the centers. The local communities, the local research organizations, and businesses will all come together. They will be experts who know best about their local areas and engage their minds to come up with various issues and discussions at the regions. And there are some that have already been launched. The Local Energy Center is the name of such efforts. There are less than 10 local energy centers throughout the nation here in Korea. And if the Basic Act is passed by the parliament, after July of next year, the current local energy center will be transformed into a local carbon neutrality center, and this will serve as a hub to bring together residents, community members, businesses, and experts to focus on realizing carbon neutral goals. Now we have great aspirations for successful center operation. We asked all government employees to leave and invited the civil society and the community members. So it was an activist workshop, in short, which focused on how to make an effective center to realize carbon neutrality. So at the local community level, the preparations are in place, but the government still has ways to cover. So there is a gap in the pace of achieving this goal. There are proposals for institutional reform and policies on local Green New Deal. So we have to support the institutional framework. So we have put together a set of deck of documents and submitted them to the National Assembly and asked for improvements in 10 different areas. And proposals and amendments presented by the parliamentarians are actually pending in the National Assembly. We basically deal with local energy transition, policy suggestions, and required improvements in the legal framework for climate crisis response. I want to share with you some local examples, but in the interest of time, I'll have to skip them. There are a lot of activities that we did with the EU Korea Climate Action team. We created a video. About 5 2 to 3 minute videos were created. So if you combine all of that together, it will be a maximum, say, 20-minute long video. That was the original plan. But in the course of shooting for the video, there were such valuable comments, materials, and proposals that were sent to us. We could not discard any of them, so we had to include all of that. So we had 8 10-minute video and 1 20-minute video, created a total of 9 video clips. And there are a lot of European materials included here. And those have been popular materials being searched on 500, 600 occasions. It's an open source, so it's easily accessible to the public. So you can dig in to get those information. And the heads of local government participated in 2 international webinars, which were valuable experiences for them. We invited the vice mayors of Paris and Oslo and talked about the climate budget systems and Paris's carbon neutrality policies. We usually see that international webinars are too short per presentation, 15-20 minutes. So we wanted to really dive deeply into a particular city situation, the ways in which they address their climate policy. So we wanted to really focus intently on 2 cities. 2 hours for Paris and 2 hours for Oslo. So the mayors of Goyang, Jeonju, and the district mayors of Taedok and other members engaged in group discussions. It was very inspirational for all of the participating members. And at the end of the seminar or webinar, they asked the regional governments to his subordinates to come up with a plan on how to apply the European examples and success stories to their local communities. So the orders were given right away to the members of the government. So unless this co-webinar was staged, we would not have been able to boldly embark on this very challenging journey. We had to make little decisions, big decisions on what video clips to include, what material to include in those video clips. The work was done over many months. It wasn't an easy job, but without the assistance of the EU-Korea Climate Action Team, we would not have pulled this through. And our efforts are evidenced in the form of a video. So it was a lot of work for us, but we hope that we could get bigger budgets in the years ahead to build upon our activities. We have a number of other projects that we did. The 2 international projects were coordinated by Jaemin Park, visiting the embassies, exchanging mails with Paris and Oslo government. So it is owing to Jaemin Park. At least 90% is due to her in making this endeavor successful. We will continue to work harder for carbon neutrality and energy transition. Thank you very much. Just talked about the association, just led by the Secretary General and the team leaders. So it's very minimal staffing, but doing a lot of work as part of their activities. All of the local governments, 2026 throughout the nation, signed this declaration, which is evidence of the strong level of commitment towards climate crisis response at the local level. So the various joint efforts and activities that we undertook, we hope that they will be of great help in assisting local governments carry out their policies. Now, according to our program today, we are to take a 10-minute break, but because of a delay in schedule, we will continue without a break. So we ask for your kind understanding. So with that, the second session on energy efficient buildings and low carbon mobility.
The first speaker is Assistant Manager Youn-kyu of the Building Energy Management Division, Korea Energy Agency. In collaboration with our team, the Building Performance Institute Europe, we have held several forums to shape policies and best practices related to zero energy building and green remodeling. So please begin your presentation. Hello everyone. I am Assistant Manager Youn-kyu from Korea Energy Agency. Before I begin my presentation, I would like to express my sincere congratulations to the successful closure of EU-Korea Climate Action Project. My presentation will focus on zero energy building. No matter how much I emphasize, it's not enough. Today is a closure event, so I'd like to share with you what kind of result we have achieved. And then I'll also talk to you about the strategy that we are pursuing to achieve zero energy building in Korea. Well, you know about zero energy building. I'm sure that you heard enough. Zero energy building certification is a set of standards and incentives established and currently in the process of being made mandatory in a gradual manner for the purpose of reducing energy consumptions and promoting the constructions of the zero energy building with the ultimate goal of fulfilling the pledges on greenhouse gas reduction in building. And also, since last year, all the buildings it's a mandatory to get their certifications. And by 2030, zero energy building is a mandatory for every single buildings. And depending on the size, all the public offices, buildings, and also private buildings, they must achieve ZEB certification. Now, zero energy building certification system, what it is, let me introduce. In order to acquire, you have to meet 3 qualifications. First, you have to achieve the build energy efficiency rating 1+1+1 and above. And second is energy self-sufficiency rate 20% and above. Third, automatic electronic reader systems or BEMS installed. Now, in order to get the zero energy building certification, we need a buffer system in the market, and also we need to acquire understanding from the stakeholders. So we have launched a zero energy building alliance, and as a launching event, we had a forum. We had more than 5 times forum, especially together with the EU-Korea climate action. We had 3rd and 4th meeting in 2019 and also in 2020. We've had the forum, and let me elaborate what this is about. First of all, the zero energy building inside, we had a meeting together with the Korea EU climate actions and project teams, Korean Energy Agency, and other team as well, and also Building Performance Institute Europe. The 4th case, it was incentive, and August this year we had hosted it together with the Ministry of Land, Transportation, and also EU delegation to Korea, and Korea Energy Agency and EU Korea Climate Action Project team took part in. And also there was an incentive from US, UK, Singapore. Incentives are built in a way that allows benefits to be relayed not only to the owner but also to the building and facilities. And also 2020, November 15, also we had another meeting, green remodeling and other incentive business models such as construction fee support. All of these were shared. Based on that, this is our future. So in relations with the ZEB Insight Forum, we'd like to provide a forum for sharing private-driven technology and policy cases, and furthermore establish a forum for developing and dissemination strategy and business models with the ultimate goal of facilitating the fulfillment of mandatory ZEB roadmap. In the future as well, we will work continuously. So this is a top-down certification, but also bottom-up opinions gather, and also business model will be carried out. Lastly, let me tell you about mid to long-term carbon neutrality strategy for the building. Very briefly, I will touch upon how we are aiming at achieving net zero. In the building area, there are new building and also existing buildings. So for the new buildings, we will strengthen the ZEB concept in Korea from nearly zero or net zero in a gradual manner. That's our first idea. Let me first touch upon that. And if you look at here, for the new buildings, our concept is net zero or near zero. So 2030 will be net zero, but all the way until 2030, it will be a near zero. For the existing building, what we plan to do is using big data for green renovations of existing buildings to nearly zero building is our plan. If you look at this milestone, you can see that we have the energy saving design standard and building energy efficiency standard. We have this table, so you can refer to that. Now, diving into the new building area, what are our strategy? First of all, we have a public sector and private sector. So, due to the feature, we have public and private sector, and we totally segregate these two sectors. For the public sectors, gradual strengthening of the ZEB certification standard to net zero will be achieved. And so we are pondering upon what should be the strategy. For the private sector, it's a mandatory, unlike the public sector. So ZEB review at a building permit stages, incentives, strengthening massively at net zero energy building certification. So we will provide greater amount of incentives for that. Now, let me tell you about the existing buildings. Already existing buildings, we need to transition from the current status to the carbon neutrality. How can we do that? Well, we have the mandatory implementation of nearly zero requirement for the buildings that are more than 15 years old. And if the buildings are more than 20 years old, that's for the private buildings, and they must enhance the energy efficiency. It's a mandatory. That's all. Thank you.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation. Please give a warm round of applause for the great presentation. Once again, in relations with the building, for the new buildings, it's a net zero building. For the existing building, it's a green remodeling should be expanded. So we can categorize it in two ways, in two sectors, how mid to long term our plans can be implemented. So he explained in a very elaborated way.
Now the second presenter is Myung-gu Chu, chairperson of Eco Mobility Network of Local Sustainability Alliance Korea. We'll talk about sustainable urban mobility. Now, the association and our team has held Eco Mobility conferences and supported the city of Jeonju on the programs to this end. Are you with us? He was not able to join us offline, so he is with us online from Daejeon.
네, 화면을 공유하도록 하겠습니다.
Let me first share my presentation.
네, 안녕하세요. 전국 지속가능발전협의회 생태교통위원장 추명구입니다.
I'm the chair for
다음
Eco
주가
Mobility
우리나라의
Network of
큰
Local
명절인
Sustainability
추석입니다.
Alliance
그래서
Korea.
오늘도
Next week is
지역에서
Chuseok holidays,
녹색 명절 캠페인을 하느라고 오늘
and I
현장에
was
참석하지 못하고요.
busy
중으로 접속하게
getting
되었습니다.
involved with the
오늘
eco-friendly
제가 발표할 내용은
Chuseok holiday program, so I'm joining you online. Now, my presentation today is on sustainable urban mobility. Now, the LSAK consists of 2030 networks nationwide, including 17 metropolitan areas, and was formed in the aftermath of the 1992 UN CED under the recommendation of the UN.
생태교통 네트워크는 교통에 대해서 국가
And with regard to mobility, our network also defines sustainable development goals, namely goal number 7, 9, 11, and 13, and is working to implement them. Now, we are faced, as you know, with multiple crises, including COVID-19, climate crisis, and inequality, mostly consequences of capitalism allowing for indiscriminate exploitation of resources, destruction of habitats, mass production, and unethical businesses on the part of multinational businesses bent on cost savings. We need a transition in our lives to address these problems. As part of that transition, we are working on eco-mobility to realize sustainable, environmental, social, and economic prosperity. Now, mobility confers upon us opportunities for economic activity, learning, hobbies, leisure, consumption, and much more. And in the city of Daejeon, for example, 72.2% of the people use most of mobility in the morning to get to work or their destinations. So transportation, as you can see, is closely linked to economic development, quality of life, and public health, making it necessary to achieve social equity that is inclusive of the groups not blessed with easy access to transit. We also need to think of ecological sustainability to minimize environmental harm arising from mobility. Now, this table shows that the transport sector accounts for 18.5% of total end-user consumption of energy. In large cities, passenger vehicles account for over 35 to 40%, and public transit about 18%. So walking and bicycling is under 10%, especially bicycling is about 1 or 2%. And also, the major culprits behind emissions are the transport sector and buildings. In Daejeon, where I live, about 86.4% of greenhouse gas emissions comes from buildings and transportation. Now, out of the nation's total emissions, transportation takes up 14%. So it is high time that we realize eco-mobility for the sake of carbon neutrality. So eco-mobility is transportation that is economical and ecological. It is light, small, allows mobility with minimal energy, emits less pollutants, occupies the least amount of space, and produces little noise. Now, according to the Korean strategy for 2050 carbon neutrality, of the petroleum oil that is consumed domestically, 32% is used in the transport sector. Now, the oil-based transport systems not only emit much greenhouse gases, but also have a grave impact on air quality. Now, in 2017, the emissions increased by 6.6 times for vehicles vis-a-vis 1990. Now, we have the carbon neutrality scenario, which was quite disappointing. In August, the 2050 Carbon Neutral Commission announced the 2050 carbon neutrality scenario. Now, what we consider to be important is a means of reduction. But the scenario only deals with changing the fuel used in the vehicles. The pollutant, the vehicle, has remained intact. What's important here is that the plan leaves out transition from automobile-centered mobility to shared and non-motorized mobility. The mobility strategy of the WHO sets priority on public transit, pedestrian mobility, bicycles and compact cities, and other land use and compact cities. Now, lower on the list are the shift from internal combustion engines to EVs or hydrogen vehicles and replacement of fossil fuels with renewables. But for some strange reason, the policies recently announced here in Korea has the priorities upside down. So our public transit policies, walking and bicycling, other non-motorized means should be considered as a priority in terms of policy making going forward to achieve carbon neutrality in the form of sustainable eco-mobility. So it is important to achieve avoidance, reduction, transition, and improvement. Now, avoidance involves reducing the need for mobility and the modes of mobility and includes work at home, closer distance between work and home, and restricted development of suburbs. Now, transition involves a shift to eco-friendly means. So in order to achieve carbon neutrality, we have carried out various campaigns, challenge, starting in 2019. As a means to achieve this, Commute by Bike Challenge was initiated in 12 cities, and this year, with the autumn season rains, the participation rate wasn't as high as what anticipated, but still it is going on. What you see here are some of the campaigns that we use to promote bicycling. And together with the Korea Geospatial Information Institute, we are getting donations for every distance traveled, and with those donations and proceeds, we are helping out the children in need. So if you look at the activities to date, in 18 regions, 15,330 people participated, and the total distance traveled is 5,600,000 kilometers and achieved an emissions reduction by 1,200,000 kg. And our efforts paid off at the 2020 Korea EU Eco Mobility Conference in Jeonju. And we were able to introduce various cases to Korea to highlight the consensus that could potentially be achieved on the importance of achieving carbon neutrality in the form of eco-mobility. And domestic cities, organizational capacities, and eco-mobility networks were the focus of this campaign and this collaboration. And lastly, we had city presentations, and we had presentations at Malmo and other European cities, which help promote policies on local government eco-mobility in Jeonju and other locations. And another accomplishment coming from this year through the EU-Korea Climate Action Project, we were able to introduce the bicycling campaign from the Netherlands example and initiated a design on pertinent plan. And in closing, we are designing an action plan for Korea-EU cooperation. We wanted to establish ties with the EU's social biking initiative this year as well, but we're unable to do so yet. So we want to collaborate further with European countries to learn more about and exchange ideas on bicycle policies in their respective regions. Now, through such programs as this EU-Korea Climate Action Project, we hope to increase the share of bicycles and its infrastructure to a bigger extent so that they will take on a bigger share of mobility here in the domestic landscape. It's the European Mobility Week soon, and we hope that we could create a safe and healthy mobility framework in Korea as well, so that we will depart from automobiles and rely on mobility that produces zero emissions for the sake of sustainability of our urban environment. So that's the presentation of sustainable urban mobility. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much. Please give him a big hand. We talked about the sustainable urban mobility, and he hoped to see bicycling or other eco-friendly transportation means to take root here in Korea, like the regions in European countries. And he emphasized that efforts have to be further redoubled in the future, and he anticipates further cooperation, bilateral cooperation with European cities. Now, thank you for your patience. We now move on to the final presentation on session 2.
Finally, we'd like to invite activist researcher Trey Park from the Green Transition Youth Group. In order to reflect the voices and ideas of young people in the process of preparing policies and strategies related to carbon neutrality and green deals in Korea, our business team held 2 meetings on green deals jointly with the Green Transition Youth. His presentation will cover what we discussed at the meeting. Please begin your presentation. Hello, everyone. My name is Trey Park. I am in charge of transportation. I belong to Green Transition Youth Group. I'm very pleased to meet you all. Let me briefly introduce to you the Green Transition Youth Group. Green Transition Youth Group is comprised of 12 young activists, and our members basically carry out our own activists, and sometimes when we need collaborations, we meet together. So this is a network. So we cover ecosystem, circular economy, transportation, just transitions, land, food, art, local autonomy, energy, and etc. So let me begin my presentation. First of all, thank you so much to all the speakers, and since I don't have much time, I will be speaking very fast. I'll be covering, first of all, the Green Transition Youth Group. Together with the EU-Korea Climate Actions, we had 2 discussions, and I will briefly touch upon what we've been discussing. And also, second, among the ideas that we've been discussing in relations with the transportation, what kind of concepts were discussed. Now, June 16, we have come up with the title of the Green Transition 6 Reasons. As you can see from this slide, in July 12th, I had another forum titled Cities Beyond Cities. And we've been discussing about 3 sectors, how the housings and also citizens' action for car-free cities and reshaping the municipal autonomy in the climate change era. And a lot of ideas were presented, what we must transcend. So let me tell you, during the local autonomy sections, we discussed that we need to go beyond the political tendencies and corrupt customs. In the housing area, we talked about the fact that we need to overcome the way of thinking that housing is not a means of profit. And also, we discussed in the transportation sector, we discussed that instead of spending a lot of time to to maintain our livelihood, we need to allocate our time to spend on the critical social issues. And some of the regions have this fixed idea that car-free societies is impossible and only experts can resolve these issues. But we need to break our way of thinking and then come up with a new way of thinking. So in Korea, also one of the important thing is that the speakers need to be invited in various sectors. All the speakers were mainly male experts. And we wanted to diversify the gender as well. In the transportation sector, we talked about Gunsan City, Jeonbuk area, where car-free city is being in the process. Lastly, and thanks to the EU-Korea Climate Action Project, for the first time, we have invited Spanish Barcelona expert who talked about how they were able to achieve super blocks 2015 to 2019. Now, among the discussion forum that we had, since I'm in charge of the transportation, the key message that I'd like to share with you is car-free cities. Then, what is the decarbonization and what is just transportation system? What do we really need? Well, it's very simple. This slide shows what we need to do. First of all, cars, we need to recognize that cars are the problems. And because cars are the heart of the problem, we need to establish a car-free cities. Then, what kind of policies and how can we establish car-free cities? But more important than ever before is deeply rooted in Korea, the concept is car is a must thing. But how can we eradicate this concept and how can we implement car-free cities? And car-free cities built by the civic society were the key message, and we focus on the civic actions, citizens' action. And also in the transportation area, how can we achieve car-free society? Once again, the general consensus and people's views is a must, but also the government policy is important. But in order to carry out our lives without car, there must be sort of a guarantee that cars are not a necessary item. But other speakers have already mentioned about it, but already the pilot cities, we can see the witness, like Mayor Satitan of the London and Paris, and also in Brazil, there's a mayor of the Curitiba city who talked about car-free cities, which is very meaningful. And we can definitely apply those best practices to Korea. And if relying on the leadership of Korean government is difficult, then it should be citizens. The civic organization must take the initiative in realizing the car-free cities, starting from the small town. And I'd like to make a three proposal. First proposal. As I mentioned, we must admit and acknowledge that cars are the problems, because not only cars consumes fossil fuels, gasoline, but you know that there's usually one people driving one car, so they are emitting huge amount of the carbon emissions. And if you look at the passenger vehicle operation, it's like 5 times more than the truck that carries logistics. So the passenger car should, if one people drive a passenger car, we need to regard that as a bad habit. And if we do that, definitely people will avoid driving a car. As you can see from this photo, once again, the autonomous vehicle, if we become a commercialized, then people will use more car. It creates inefficient usage of the urban city space. So once we agree that cars are the problem, then we need to go to the city where no cars are being operated. So if the central government cannot take initiative, the local government need to take the initiatives. Already you can see that cities around the world, they are coming up with special ways not to use the car, but rely heavily on the public transportations, walking and cycling. And through this kind of network, urban cities are sharing their best practices, and also they are spreading the concept that car-free city is a must. There's another case that I'd like to introduce is in 2017 in the United States, there was a city called Sanctuary City, and some of the cities carried out demonstration, and they need to carry out a campaign to protect illegal immigrants. And if the central government goes to the wrong direction, then local autonomy, local government, civic organization must take initiatives to choose another way forward. We shouldn't always look toward what the central government take action. So that's my proposal. Last but not least, this is my proposal. We have a habit of relying everything on the hands of the expert. But instead of just waiting until the experts take actions, these civic organizations and each individuals can take actions. One of the most important factor is the tactical urbanisms, which means that instead of just relying on the top-down policy making, we can design our own city. One of the way that's attracting a lot of attention is called tactical urbanisms. And tactical urbanism existed in the construction field, that even though they spent astronomical amount of the money, still they could not enjoy a good outcome. So instead of spending ton of money, they are relying on low-cost temporary actions that addresses urban designs. This small but scalable intervention aiming at producing long-term change. And if you look at this photo, you can see that street plans collaborations are spreading around the United States. The background reason is because there are a lot of tactical urbanism, textbook, guide, and these informations are easily accessible. It's an open source. And my organization also have published a Korean versions of the tactical urbanism textbook. And we also shared the example that in the city of Gunsan, the parking lot has totally become vacated because no one is driving the car. And we can make most of that, how we can open all the know-how of establishing the car-free society. So I spoke really fast. And probably please understand that if my presentation was not sufficient, please understand once again, I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to EU Korea Climate Action key expert Sung-hee. Thank you so much for your help. Thank you for the great presentation. Once again, Trade Park made a great presentation. Tactical urbanism, I'm very much impressed with that suggestions. Yes, we need to break away from the existing inertia, and then we can start from small, but various attempts can come together to bring about a transformation of the city. In order to establish a sustainable city, various attempts can be made. Now all the presentations have been completed. Now we will begin the panel discussions. The moderator of the panel discussion, we have invited 3 experts from Korea and 2 experts from the EU side.
I will briefly introduce our panelists. On the Korean side, we have the Daejeon Energy Transition Network, which work together with us in the local energy transition project. We have Eun Park with us. And from the local government side, we have Chairperson Young Suk-oh, Climate and Energy Network of Local Sustainability Alliance Korea, and as a final Korean expert representing the youth from the Institute for Green Transformation is a researcher, Min Ji-yoon. I'd like to ask all of the panelists to come forward and take your seats. And we have our European partners joining us via online. And we have an executive director from the Building Performance Institute Europe who gave us great assistance in dealing with the building performance, Mr. Oliver R. Rapp. And the decarbonization project in Chungnam was a project that involved the next European partner, Ms. Annika Tonjes, researcher of the Future Energy and Industry Systems of Wuppertal Institute for Climate, Environment and Energy, Germany. Now, Mr. Rapp is from Belgium, and Ms. Tonjes is from Germany. And last but not least, let me introduce to you the moderator of the panel session, is Youn-kyu Park, Director of ICLEI Korea Office. Youn-kyu Park joined us in our efforts from the very launch of our climate action team for slightly over a year. He worked as the responsible advisor to the team and continued to stay on various cooperative projects on eco-mobility. So with that, I'd like to hand over the microphone to Youn-hee Park. Yes, thank you, Ms. Sun, for those kind introductions. Now, it is an honor and great pleasure for me to take part in the final session of this closure event on the EU-Korea Climate Action Project. Because our panelists are apparently prepared, so let me cut to the chase. I was asked to keep time, and I'll try to manage it as effectively as possible. Okay, now question to all of the panel members. Okay, the big task ahead of us is achieving 2050 carbon neutrality. All questions begin with this grand cause. As we wrap up our project, and you have all been engaged as co-partners in this endeavor, in order to be successful with carbon neutrality, what is the most critical issue in the course of your activities, and what should be our roles? So this is a common question to all of the panel members. We look forward to listening to your experience. First, is Eun-young Park. Good afternoon. I am the information director of a civil group called Daejeon Energy Transition Network. I'm the co-director, and I'm part of another civil organization called Green Climate Daejeon. We have the Daedok District Energy Plan and Energy Transition projects that we engaged in, and I was part of those programs from the very beginning, and have come up with some of the ideas on carbon neutrality and proposals for future cooperative efforts. As a Daejeon Energy Transition Network, we are a local entity, and there are localized carbon neutrality tasks and roles that are on our minds since we're a local agency. Well, first of all, I have to say that the main characters in the mission to achieve carbon neutrality shall be the local community and government. If scenarios or stories, then they are brought to life by the main characters of the story. Now, in a scenario where the main storyline concerns carbon neutrality, the main character should be the local community. Only when the community becomes an agent of transition can accountability and execution be guaranteed. Now, the local community is where elements of carbon neutrality, such as industry, transportation, energy, and public participation, are found and intertwined. It is a starting point of discussions on ways to curb emissions and requires support from the national government to fill in the gaps along the way. Now, the current carbon neutrality scenario, however, seems only to be occupied with determining reductions targets for different sectors. Unless the local community takes an active part and deeply considers ways of implementation, we will end up with arbitrary mitigation targets assigned to us as mere numbers. Now, local administration will not be able to wholeheartedly devote itself to reaching these numbers. It has very little experience, if any, in assessing how much is being emitted and what they can do about it. And moreover, if the head of local government lacks commitment to this goal, the administrative arm will hardly feel obliged to implement any policies or campaigns for carbon neutrality. That is why the main character in the story must be the local community, and the national government should ask of it, through pressuring, if need be, to present ways to achieve targets. After all, at the end of the day, zero carbon targets are imposed on the local community. The local community should be made to offer, as well as feasible options that fit their circumstances, and be asked questions on how they will be carried out. Absent any implementation discipline at the local level, reductions will become evasive. Now, we must establish an action framework to strengthen enforceability. When it comes to achieving carbon neutrality, it requires a shift in urban systems. This is a clear premise. An important point in the implementation process is changing urban structures encompassing industries, transportation, energy, and welfare to better align with responses to climate crisis. An integrated and pragmatic action framework will be critical, but creating a department within the local government that oversees the whole idea would hinge on the commitment of the head of the local government. Even if the local administration is told that the broader carbon neutrality plan has been drafted and will be executed by the state, it appears to remain passive in designing an action framework. Now, if the government is serious about carbon neutrality, then it must proactively seek ways to establish a framework at the local level and to acquire buy-ins from the heads of local governments. Now, I was able to learn about the climate transition governance of Malmö, Sweden, through the European Foundation project I was involved in. And I was impressed by the fact that the responsible employee remain in place to become experts. And we also must review the basic plans on carbon neutrality that have been set up at the local community level. There are a lot of plans that have inundated local communities relating to climate challenges. And it is important to build distributed energy systems as well. And Daejeon, we are seeing more share of the population showing keen interest in energy issues, and the ability to autonomously address local energy challenges will indeed grow. Can I point on proposals for cooperation? Yes, how can civil society derive more pragmatic approaches for future cooperation and activities for carbon neutrality? Thank you for your comments.
Now, from the perspective of the activists who work very close with the local government, let me invite Chairperson Oh Yong-seok from the Climate and Energy Network Local Sustainability Alliance Korea. I was just introduced by the moderator. I am Oh Yong-seok, Chairperson of the Local Sustainability Alliance Korea Climate and Energy Network. Well, the question imposed on me is, what are the local government level carbon neutrality implementation tasks? I am not a local government official, but since I work at Local Sustainability Alliance Korea, as you know, there are secretariat and more than 100 regions within Korea, various activities are being carried out. Local Sustainability Alliance Korea is an alliance or a governance organization where stakeholders take part in. One of the important partner of this Local Sustainability Alliance Korea is a local government, and that is why this question was imposed on me. And already Director Park Eun-young mentioned, but carbon neutrality must be carried out by local area, not only new building, green energy transitions, but our food in various areas. All important decisions must be planned out, implemented by the local government itself. That is why implementations of the carbon neutrality at the local government is critical. And once again, in order to implement carbon neutrality, there are a couple of tasks that must be set out and that must be taken as an action. So let me make an action. First of all, the visions and goals must be presented, and also there should be indices to measure the performance. Last year, 226 small organizations have announced their visions. That was quite surprising event. And frankly speaking, after declarations, I thought that some actions or some result could be produced. However, the head of the local autonomy, they signed the commitment and also agreement, but I really don't know what are the tangible results that we can actually witness. I sincerely hope to see some outcomes instead of just declarations by the head of the local government. Once the vision is declared, there must be an indicator or a performance index that can measure what kind of result they have produced. Second, it is necessary to establish a regional carbon neutral master plan that prioritizes the response to the climate crisis. Climate crisis is very, very important. It is related with the environment, but also it's related to the economy, to the society. So it must encompass various sectors. So local government should not ask environmental department to be in charge, but also the healthcare, the culture, the social department. They must actively take part in this plan. So every single department within the local government must take active part in the carbon neutral master plan, map out and also respond. And when I work with the local government, since I am very much interested in transportation, I work closely with the transportation, but in relations with the carbon neutral plan, when I meet the Director General, they think that always climate crisis or climate changes must be handled by the environmental department, not the urban planning, transportation planning, economic planning, or welfare or cultural policy department. But it must be treated as a common goal. I mean, we shouldn't just focus our attentions on the greenhouse gas emissions, how much it was reduced. The environmental department did a good work. We shouldn't do that. We should invite all the departments to work together. Third proposal that I'd like to make is that it's necessary to form organizations and governance body that can implement the regional carbon neutrality plan within the local government. Not a single department can address this goal. There are various stakeholders, companies, agencies, organizations, civic agencies. All of these various stakeholders must be able to take part in. So we need to form a certain governance body. Fourth, it is necessary to actively support citizens' climate response activities, because 2050 carbon neutrality goal, we have a big question mark. We have a big doubt because it's such an ambitious goal. We really don't know whether we can achieve this goal or not. And there's no way for us to achieve this goal unless we have a full understanding that, I mean, we need to reduce the emissions by more than half within a couple of decades. So such a rapid speed, we need to take an actions. And is it really possible in order to do that? People need to be aware of this policy. They need to support. So we need to acquire citizen support, and also we need to educate these people so that we can speed up the local carbon neutral policy implementations. We need to provide appropriate information to the citizens. They need to be educated so that their awareness can be enhanced. So such support must be done. Lastly, it is necessary to prepare a system for reporting and evaluating the performance of the carbon neutral implementation at the local government level. And we need to report to the citizens. That kind of system must be built. Thank you very much. Local government, can they really do well in terms of the carbon neutrality? I believe that it was really well mentioned. Especially, local government must be responsible for this goal. So governance must be also connected. Thank you so much for your comment.
Next question. Let us hear from Jeong-yeon from the Institute for Green Transformation. You have the floor. Good afternoon. I'm part of the youth panel. My name is Jeong-yeon from the Institute for Green Transformation. Well, first and foremost, I must say that the youth is always dubbed as the future generation. But if you take into account the reality of the eco-terror that the youth is confronted with, now this is indeed an anomaly. The youth generation will have to bear the consequences of the climate crisis. But the youth activists are crying out that they want to die old, and I myself always think about whether I can grow old to become a grandmother on every second of the day. We need mid to long-term and more disciplined plans to create a more healthier and safe society with climate issues addressed. Now, I have put together some issues and solutions and proposals. In the sixth report of IPCC, the date in which the global temperature will rise by 1.5 degrees was brought closer to us by 12 years from 2052 to 2040. So we must not remain complacent or overconfident that we are able to easily achieve the carbon neutrality targets. And I must say that the carbon budget is not like an ordinary monetary budget. It is pretty much a maximum level, pretty saturated, beyond which adverse impacts become irreversible. It is like a probability game that drills down on the seriousness of a climate doom. And we must also do away with uncertain technologies such as CCUS. We have to reduce production. And as Park has mentioned earlier, the urban systems have become more systematic and restructured. And the material-based circular economy should also be reformed and re-altered to create a higher quality of lifestyle in the regions that is based on compassion and inclusion. And we speak of linear reduction targets. We should not remain complacent with these targets. The coal-fired power plants should be phased out preemptively. And in the process, a just transition should receive political commitment in order to reduce emissions as much as possible, and the ultimate goal of creating social equity in our society. And as part of the role of the youth, well, the youth have little experience and resources compared to the adult generation. However, this can prove to be our benefit because we're less susceptible to the status quo, and our wisdom will be included in the policy decisions to take more dramatic actions. And recently, the Youth 2040 climate neutrality scenario was announced and signed by 43 local governments to pull forward the target date from 2050 to 2040 to achieve climate neutrality. And I believe that in this process as well, the voice of the youth should also fall through. Thank you very much. Talked about greater accountability and responsibility being conferred on important agents and stakeholders. And the youth, it is high time upon them to become more voices for us. And we should be more heedful and mindful of the voices and positions of the youth generations as well in our quest for carbon neutrality. Now, there are a lot of messages conveyed to us by those who have done business here in Korea. There are a lot of takeaways, and there are points that we need to take to heart. Now, so far, we heard the Korean voices. Now, let us hear from our international partners, European partners. Through the Climate Action Project, there have been many activities that were undertaken, and let us listen from these European partners about the outcomes from their perspective. First, with regard to building performance, from the Building Performance Institute Europe, to be addressed by Oliver Raff, joining us online. Thank you for your patience and joining us online. So can we hear your voice now?
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me well and the sound is good. It is a great pleasure and honor for me to be invited again to speak at an event of the EU-Korea Climate Action Partnership. I had the pleasure to be in Korea at several events in late 2019. I think it was in November 2019. And it was a very fruitful start of the collaboration back then. Let me just give you briefly my European perspective, but also a perspective on potential future collaboration and how we can use the results which have been achieved by the EU-Korea Climate Action Partnership so far. BPIE is focusing on the building sector, on the built environment. So that is really our key expertise. And when it comes to transforming the building sector, we know that it is as big a challenge as transforming the other sectors. And the speakers before me have highlighted how important it is to work with local communities to really anchor the transformation process with the citizens, with the people, and to have them on board from the very beginning. This is definitely true for transforming the building sector, for transforming the built environment, and for making sure that our buildings in the future will really be zero carbon buildings. But what does that mean? How do we really trigger this transformation? What's the big challenge here? And one of the big challenges is, of course, that how are we changing the investment which is going into the sector? And how are we making sure that business decisions are adjusted and are taken in favor of climate neutrality in the sector? Well, first of all, I think, and this is based on experience which we have in Europe, we need a regulatory framework. We need a set of regulation of laws which really drive that transformation. This is a set of laws and regulations which ideally addresses the building sector not just as a whole, but really targets different building types, different investors, different factors which could drive investment decisions for a zero carbon building stock. That is very important to understand, that there is not just one policy which would cover the whole building sector, because it is so diverse. It has many different ownership structures. There are many different types of buildings. So we need to really tailor our regulatory framework to the different target groups, to the different building types which we have. And when this regulatory framework is in place, it is of course essential that there is support for the implementation of this regulatory framework. With support, I mean technical support, really helping and advising local governments, regional governments, how to implement the regulation. But I also mean financial support, financial incentives through, for example, tax reductions or direct subsidies or low interest loans. There is a broad mix of financial instruments. Again, they should be tailored to the specific target groups, to the specific building types. And of course, what we also need is then a system which monitors and evaluates the progress of implementation of this regulatory framework. We need to constantly monitor what is happening on the ground, whether we are really moving to a zero carbon building stock. And we also need to ask the question, well, what kind of adjustments should we make to the regulatory framework so that it is really effective all the time and that it really meets the target which we have agreed to? That also means that in the end, the people who invest in buildings, who invest in real estate, must be made accountable for the climate impact of their own buildings, of their own investments. That is something which is not well established yet. We are often talking about accountability of the large global companies, whether it's the auto companies or whether it's steel companies. We need to make sure that the real estate investment community also is accountable for their business decisions when it comes to the climate impact of the building sector. And in the exchange which we had in the past years, since 2019, between the experts on buildings in the European Union and in Korea, we have found that we're actually facing many of the same, problems, the same barriers. And I think there is a lot which can be gained from a future exchange, but maybe I will come to that question in a little bit later, in a few moments. So I would like to close here my first statement. I'll be happy to come back to you later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Executive Director Raf. Once again, since once again, your organization has an expertise in building. You talk about how carbon neutrality can be achieved through building performance. Together with the local linkage or working together with the local autonomy, definitely we can realize building performance. Of course, he emphasized the regulatory framework is a necessity, and also we need a system to implement that. And through the regulatory framework, we need to once again come up with a couple of suggestions. So he emphasized the importance of the regulatory framework and system. And the message that I got is there any determination and willingness to implement this? If there is willingness, we can establish a regulatory framework and system. But building, there is an ownership issue, and also the real estate is related with investment. So thank you so much for your comment. Upon listening to your comment, I truly agree with you. I believe it was interesting that you have the same common challenge that Korea is faced with. So definitely I look forward for your additional comment.
Next, European partner, we will hear the voice of Ms. Annika Tanyas from Wuppertal Institute. It's a very popular and well-known institute here in Korea, working together with the ICLE Korea office. So it is very meaningful that Ms. Tanyas from Wuppertal Institute can join us as part of this panel discussion. Okay, so Ms. Tanyas, ready when you are.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I'm very happy to be here. I've had the pleasure once before earlier this year to give a lecture at the Youth Frontier, which I thought was a very nice part of the project, and my colleague Timon Venat has also participated in a few other events, and yeah, we have been very interested to be involved in the project and follow the project's results, and I already learned a lot today from listening to previous sessions and speakers, so thank you very much for that. All right, the most important issues, challenges to achieve climate neutrality, that is a big issue. So I'm going to focus on one thing that is a key component of our work at Wuppertal Institute. And so yeah, you could say that electrification is across all energy consuming sectors, transport, buildings, industry. It will be a key strategy for reaching climate neutrality. We can't do without it. Everything from a household central heating system to a big industrial steel plant will run on green electricity or on hydrogen produced with green electricity. And this massive transformation brings a host of big challenges in different sectors. And it also shows that it all depends on the decarbonization and the capacity ramp up in the power sector. So not only do we need to build up renewable capacity, electricity grids, storage capacity, power to gas technologies, we also need to build back and eventually exit power generation from fossil fuels like coal and natural gas. And this brings its own set of challenges. While technological innovation is often seen as a promise of better future things to come, this technological ex-innovation, so to say, that we need to undertake is often tinted by a certain loss of jobs, of regional prosperity and identity. And many former coal regions in Europe, such as the German Ruhr area where I grew up, have already undergone such massive structural change. But other regions, both in South Korea and in the EU, are facing such a transformation over the next decades on the road to climate neutrality. This includes, for example, the Changnam province, which has been one of the focus areas of this project, and it also includes the Rhine area close to Wuppertal, so where my institute is located, which is home to Europe's biggest lignite mine. And a just transition in these regions will be key for a successful and socially acceptable decarbonization of the power sector, and therefore of all sectors depending greatly on the availability of plenty of green electricity. Such a transition cannot be achieved through top-down structural policy alone, because adverse effects are regionally concentrated, local government plays an important role, and so do labor unions, environmental organizations, the energy companies themselves, but also other economic actors, cultural groups, as well as the general public. And these diverse stakeholder groups' interests are often at odds, and facilitating a dialogue between them is key for unlocking local potential and achieving a successful transition. So focusing on employment is usually the thing with the just transition, and it is of course key, but it should be complemented by other cultural considerations. How can these newly free spaces that used to be mines and power plants be best put to use? How can the local industrial heritage be preserved while also designing new creative spaces that increase the quality of life and attract both future-proof businesses and highly skilled labor to the area? In my hometown, Dortmund, I grew up watching a very successful example of such a transformation. In an old industrial part of the city that was affected by the end of the coal era in the region, a big industrial steel site was closed down. The city bought it from the steel company and began developing it. An artificial lake was dug out and surrounded by a big boardwalk and plenty of commercial real estate along the waterfront, where restaurants and cafes and ice cream places and other companies could move into. Also, a lot of modern, energy efficient, upscale housing was developed around the lake. And over the last decade or so, what used to be a rather poor and kind of shabby part of my city has developed into one of the hippest and most attractive parts for living and business and recreation. The city didn't have a lot of money, but managed to finance it anyway with a mixture of public funding from regional and national government, and also from the profits of selling the land for development. It's a place I personally like to visit often when I return to my hometown, and at the same time, it's a great example of structural change done right. So in the future, we will certainly need that kind of creative problem solving, because the transition to climate neutrality will inevitably bring a lot of challenging changes. I think it's crucial to understand that these kinds of solutions can never be achieved solely by focusing on top-down government. In order to find local solutions, we need to see and understand local potential. And that means we need to bring local stakeholders to the table. Local government, companies, NGOs, like this project we're saying goodbye to today has been doing. And yeah, by poking our head out a little bit and looking at what others are doing, what is working and what isn't, we can certainly learn a lot from each other and thus find creative solutions to the climate crisis. Thank you.
예, 고맙습니다.
Yes, thank you very much. Seems that we need to take on a more aggressive attitude when we consider carbon neutrality targets. We have to be more imaginative in terms of specific ways to achieve the carbon neutrality targets. This naturally requires a dramatic transformation, big astronomical transition, calling for carbon neutrality, and we have to change the situation so that we could be prepared to accommodate carbon neutrality. We have to use our imaginations to create a more realistic and pragmatic visual picture of a carbon neutrality and society going forward. So what sort of attitude and what sort of culture could we rely on or enjoy in the future roads? So more concrete and specific imagination of carbon neutral societies would entail more creative solutions and ideas for effective answers to this issue of climate challenges. Thank you for those input.
이제 그야말로 지금까지는 우리가 이 사업에 함께 참여했던 분들의 그동안의 소회입니다.
Now we've listened to the comments and feelings of participating partners, and they shared with us the strong messages that they want to take on more aggressive activities to achieve targets. And they also talked about local entities and the leadership of the local communities.
사람이 우리가
But it is all about us, and we're creating our own society that we have to live in the future. We can only achieve to the extent that we make an effort in this grand cause. So we have to share pragmatic results and outcomes, which is a big homework for us going down the road. Now let us design and shape our future. So the climate action project between EU and Korea will come to a close today, and we've seen important entities like engage in exchanges and share valuable experiences. Then in the future, the lessons that we've learned, the exchanges that we were engaged in terms of ideas and plans, could give rise to future thought about what sort of potential future projects we could consider and what sort of contents and ideas or project ideas that we can take into account. So we will give you a few more minutes in the same order to give your final sentiments and as also your suggestions for future action plans. Okay, first, Ms. Park, please give us hope. Yes, in formulating the local energy plan at Taedok district, we looked into the cases of Europe. We looked at Malmö's governance, Kalmarberg, Denmark ecological project, and also Finland's Kalamatar smart city, Mollum in Denmark, the community-led projects. So these are specific programs that we looked into. In order to implement and actually pragmatically execute these ideas, our center and the Taedok district government and the regional community members came together to generate ideas. That was very meaningful because in Daejeon, this is actually something new first to come. So the experience on governance that focus on concrete action was indeed very meaningful and valuable learning experience for us. So I'd like to take this occasion to thank the climate action team for making that possible. And in that regional energy transition plan, we've incorporated some of the ideas that you just mentioned. The Yeonchuk zone will become a smart carbon neutral zone, and the Taedok district is making preparations for that. And there's a village in this district to carry out microgrid and the power lab project that we learned from the Borneo project to combine the community's ideas with available technologies will also be incorporated. And the Taedok Energy Center is working together with the Daejeon City government to create an eco industry center. There are 4 zones in Daejeon. 4 large ones. They will be transitioned to an eco-complex. In order to incorporate all of these in our plan, we have to work harder and become more diligent in implementing these plans. So as part of our local community effort, we will work to cooperate in terms of exchanges with cities that share similar histories and examples. One regretful point is that we at the district ask for assistance, but when it comes to potential problems, if this is implemented and executed, well, they're bound to see some problems, and they were not able to join us in the solution-seeking process as well. So if possible, we would be interested to learn more about potential solutions that can address the problems that we might encounter as part of joint exchanges and create a network among joint-minded entities in this endeavor. Thank you very much. Mr. O now.
Well, evaluation expectations of cooperation project is the question that you have asked me. And from the perspective of the Local Sustainability Alliance Korea, well, I guess all the details have already been mentioned, so I will not repeat. And now I'll focus on my expectations and my evaluation and how I feel about that. As Sun Bong-hee already mentioned, when this was started, all the local autonomies and everyone were very eager to take part in, and there were a lot of discussions. However, due to various reasons, some of the projects were not carried out as we expected. So, although 3 years and 9 months have gone by, quite a lot have been insufficiently spent, especially as we proceed other projects in the later part of these 3 years and 9 months. We realized that we could have produced much greater outcomes. So that's once again a regrettable feelings. We hope that this project can continue in the near future, and together with the local governments, we do a lot of collaboration work. And also, the cities in Korea, they form a partnership or sisterhood with the cities in the EU. And in case of the European Union, local cities, they do have a lot of best practices which we'd like to learn from. And together with the local cities in Korea, if the sisterhood can be formed or if a partnership can be formed, then Korean cities can definitely learn a lot from the European cities. And I sincerely hope that one-to-one sisterhood or partnership between the cities in EU and Korea can be formed. Now, energy transitions or eco-friendly various areas can be achieved. Based on my limited knowledge, I know that there are a lot of great cases like mobility or energy transitions, or they also have these competitions in Europe like Social Viking Challenge, those programs where citizen participation is very active. And also there are Kwelon was also selected for the best city, and city activities or civic organization best practices, if there are, we'd like to learn from that, especially the eco-mobility policies of the EU we'd like to learn. And I believe that European Union came up with a manual that describes what are happening in each city. And if we can share that information, that would be great. So for that, we need to form a carbon neutrality platform in relations with the energy transitions. Any local government or head of the local government, if they are interested in, they can get access to this open platform, look for the best practices conducted in the European cities, and they can make a decision whether they can apply these practices to Korean cities. And in order to do that, I hope that it's necessary to organize the best practices and policy in each field so that we can exchange among the local government. That's all. Thank you very much. So in the early stage of the project, I guess this was also mentioned in our brainstorming session. So Yoon-min-ji?
Yes, Mr. Park earlier has talked about our program. We talked about the roundtable sessions that we had on 2 occasions to deal with green growth and carbon neutrality. And we wanted to emphasize that climate crisis is a global crisis, and a lot of the questions and perspective, in order to meld them together, the youth with diverse interests and from different sectors held a pre-seminar. We wanted to emphasize that point to voice the sentiments of the youth. In Gyeongnam, Gwangju, Incheon, Gure, and Germany, Netherlands, Spain, Barcelona, one of the cities and countries were all part of this network in taking part in the roundtables. And we talked about the youth activist programs, and there are a lot of those who joined online, about 100. So the level of interest on this roundtable discussion was very high. We shared a lot of documents and discussions on European policies. Researchers, businessmen, and administrative experts took part as part of this very meaningful exchange. And what was discussed at the roundtable was the local government green guideline, and that will also be reflected in the policies. And as for future cooperation options, well, we wanted to see more roundtable sessions. There are one-time only roundtables, so 2 occasions were held. It was not sufficient time for bonding and rapport among participants. So outside of the roundtables, it would be nice if we were able to hold workshops to carry out ongoing exchanges and efforts toward achieving solidarity among relevant stakeholders. So as for visions, we have to be ecologically conscious and be resident or community focused and share our success stories and failures as well to really achieve the central results. Well, thank you. This entities here in Korea mentioned that the experience done so far was very meaningful and they wanted to see more exchanges and cooperation going forward. Now our European partners. So what to do as for future steps? Mr. Rapp first.
Thank you very much. Well, I would like to echo what the Korean speaker said. Of course, more exchange, more information, more experience exchange would be extremely helpful. But of course, the question is really on what kind of topics. I mentioned earlier that in our discussions in the past, we have come to understand that the barriers to decarbonize the building sector are very, very similar, both in Korea and the European Union. And among these barriers is the question, how do we really bring down costs of zero carbon buildings? How can we make sure that buildings which are climate friendly are also affordable? So that is one of the big topics for a potential future exchange. There are solutions, I am certain, which could be discussed and be presented and just learned from. But the other big challenge is the question of the ability of the construction sector to actually deliver zero carbon buildings, to really build them. So questions around the skills which are there currently in the construction sector or skills which might be lacking so that the construction sector is really able to produce and deliver a zero carbon building stock. That is something which should really be in the center of the exchange because it is also about fostering innovation in the sector. So it's not just a topic where one can say, well, we are agreeing some laws and then everything is fine. That's not going to be the solution. We really need to ask the question, how can we drive innovation in the sector? And a third topic I would like to suggest is the question, how do we move from looking at the question, how are we decarbonizing an individual building to decarbonizing whole regions, whole urban quarters? Mrs. Tönjes earlier mentioned the example of the structural transformation which happened in her hometown in Dortmund, and there are many other examples of this in many European cities. Looking at the processes which enabled that transformation and asking the question, what are the ingredients for a successful transformation, could really be a very, very interesting topic. And of course, it would be wonderful if the exchange could be intensified, could be deepened, meaning that more, well, technical experts would be able to meet and exchange, and hopefully physical face-to-face meetings will be possible in the future again, because I think when people meet physically and maybe when people have the opportunity to participate in study tours, the learning, the exchange is more intensive, is deepened. Of course, we should keep that. We should keep in mind that we don't want to travel around the globe just for the sake of traveling. We want to minimize traveling as well, so that we can minimize the carbon footprint of traveling. But nevertheless, I think some physical exchange meetings in the future, study tours, and so on, should ideally be on the program of future EU-Korea exchange. Thank you very much.
As you have seen, everyone have noted in agreement. They all agree to meet you in person. Yes, I mean, talking about building, but not talking about construction doesn't make sense. Thank you so much for your comment.
Yeah, Ms. Annika Tönjes, the microphone is yours.
All right. I would also like to emphasize again the valuable multi-stakeholder approach of this project. From my experience, this is becoming more and more relevant as we're getting further into the details and minutiae of how to actually practically decarbonize our economies. Multi-stakeholder exchange, especially bringing the non-state perspective to the table, has been crucial for the Wuppertal Institute's work. We have several ongoing projects focusing on coal regions in Germany and across Europe, in which the key focus of our work is actually on facilitating this type of dialogue between the different stakeholders to keep those regions, to help those regions transition. And the Institute is also active in a big cross-stakeholder project, which is focusing on another big transition, which is that of heavy industry. Because a lot of energy-intensive industries have developed around the local coal region over the years and the decades, like steel, cement, and chemical companies. And decarbonizing these industries is the next big undertaking for this area. And again, a lot of stakeholders need to be involved, from the companies themselves to the local governments, labor unions, environmental organizations. They all bring their own perspective and their own interests to the table that need to be considered when we imagine and develop industrial pathways towards climate neutrality. And the other great thing about this project, and I'm echoing previous speakers, is quite obviously the exchange across national borders. And I think that a lot of mutual learning happened here in this project, even though the COVID-19 pandemic did prevent some travel and in-person meetings that would certainly have been valuable. But I think that with such a massive global undertaking to achieve true climate neutrality in the span of just a few decades, essentially, we need to seize every opportunity to learn from each other. And although some of the challenges we face are, of course, different, there are some important similarities between South Korea on the one hand and the EU, and also in particular the area I'm from on the other hand. Both are highly industrialized and highly urbanized and facing similar challenges around green cities, green industry, and just transition. And I think it would be very valuable to keep up this cooperation in the future in person when possible and sensible, to continue learning from each other on all of these different issues. So I already mentioned industry transition. This is my other area of research, other than the energy transition, and the two are, of course, heavily interlinked. And I think that this could be also a great focus area for future exchange between South Korea and the EU, to look at strategies to move to clean industry and a green economy. In our highly industrialized countries, how can we deal with the fact that a lot of big companies' current central business models are incompatible with the green economy? How can we move to more sustainable business models and keep our industrial strength? So yeah, I believe that these focus areas of industry and green economy are, again, involving different stakeholders and having a dialogue and exchange between South Korea and the EU could be a very valuable approach for future collaboration. Thank you.
아유, 감사합니다. 뭐
Yes, thank you very much. We've heard from the two European partners. We see a lot of people nodding in the room, identifying what you've just said. And also members from the Climate Action Project team would also join me in expressing the fact that we had great meaningful experiences in the past years engaging in various activities. Much have been covered as part of the panel members, and I think the ideas generated suggestions will be of assistance to you in planning for future cooperation. Now, as a Korean partner, I'd like to just mention one closing comment. I believe it was Mr. Min-ji Yoon from the Institute for Green Transformation. That the Institute did not work alone. It involved other agents as part of a larger collaborative project. Now, that is an important facet of this project. Individual organizations are engaged in their own area of expertise, but when they're able to receive support from outside agencies, organizations, it could produce greater outcomes and further revamp outcomes. And this climate action team is meaningful in that it was able to further redouble the support and the impact coming from the activities. And Korean agents are showing greater interest in the cases in Europe, and the European partners, I believe that they are now showing greater interest in what's going on here in Korea. We believe that the solidarity built so far could be further strengthened, and we'd like to see ongoing, continued activities going down the road. Not just the partner participated in the project and the team, but let's have everybody congratulate ourselves in the progress made so far and communicate and identify with each other more closely. This concludes the panel discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, moderator, and also all the panelists. Thank you so much. You may go back to your seats. Now, the most important session is remained. Well, the EU delegations to the Republic of Korea was the main agent of leading this EU-Korea Climate Action Project. Although we are closing this project, continuously there are other projects to be carried out. So now we'd like to invite His Excellency John Bogatz, Deputy Head of the EU Delegation to Republic of Korea, to hear about the future projects and also what his impression was about. So let us all invite His Excellency Deputy Head of the EU Delegation.
Thank you, Bong-hee. So I have the honor to, I guess, conclude the work of 3 years and 9 months. I've not been involved since the beginning, but I have over the last year, and so it's a big honor to be able to say the almost final words. So let me thank you all for actively participating in today's final project event. In particular, of course, to thank the project team for organizing it. I'm very impressed also with the technical achievement. I think at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, things tended to go wrong from time to time, but now everything runs very, very smooth. Thank you also for the speakers for sharing their climate action experiences. I'm very proud that the EU-Korea Climate Action has been able to contribute over the years to accelerate climate action as well as awareness in Korea, and to enable actors from all walks of life to add their share to address the main challenge, I believe, the main challenge of our time. As was just mentioned, half of it, I guess, happened while the pandemic was ravaging the globe, which obviously did not make it easier, but I think the team has done a great job in finding a way to have meaningful exchanges nevertheless. We've heard today many great examples of how action at local level and by civil society actors can make a real difference and be a driving force and a catalyst for climate action. I want to express my great appreciation to all those who have made this project a success, to encourage you to redouble your efforts and to offer the EU's continued support. This is all necessary because, as we have also been made aware today, the challenge we face together is today even greater, I believe, and more urgent than when the project started. And the solutions we have seen also today are not always straightforward to realize. Many speakers have made references to the recent report by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, indicating that already 1.1 degree warming has taken place, and that in order to keep it at 1.5 degrees, more countries need to step up their ambition. The UN Secretary General, Mr. Guterres, called the report a red alert for our planet, and was clear that to limit the global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees, we must cut global emission by 45% by 2030 from 2010 levels. Many speakers have also indicated that, of course, numbers are just numbers, but I do think it is important that we use this occasion, which Ms. von der Leyen, the Commission President, yesterday addressed as a moment of truth. It is important that this ambition is set, that our leaders send this message, and that this is then implemented. I already mentioned Ms. von der Leyen yesterday. She gave a State of the Union address, and there the President of the European Commission indicated that when it comes to climate change and the nature crisis, Europe can do a lot, and it will also support others. You have heard today what the EU intends to do to transform its society. And while we have been encouraged by recent developments in Korea, we hope to see more ambition still from Korea and urge it to take a leadership role in fighting the climate crisis, in line with its economic and political standing and weight. It is vital Korea presents an NDC in line with its 2050 zero commitment and make clear its plans to phase out coal and also how it intends to achieve these goals. So while today the EU-Korea Climate Action Project is coming to an end, climate action will remain a key priority for cooperation between the EU and Korea. We can assist and encourage each other, and we look for ways to combine diplomatic exchanges with concrete actions. Recently, the Vice President of the European Commission, Mr. Timmermans, responsible for climate action, visited Korea, and that opened the way to explore new avenues of future cooperation, for example, in the field of green hydrogen, as well as achieving a higher level of mutual ambition. Just to give a few examples to show how our practical cooperation continues at this very moment, let me turn to some of our other ongoing cooperation initiatives in the field of climate action at subnational level. We have a project called the Strategic Partnerships for the Implementation of the Paris Agreement, and this project has worked on topics such as coal phase-out and the promotion of renewable energy sources. Secondly, we also have the International Urban and Regional Cooperation Project, which is currently being launched, and which will facilitate city partnerships between, for example, Seoul and Dublin, Busan and Rotterdam, as well as Sejong and Sofia. Thematically, the project will focus on topics such as green urban planning, low carbon mobility, and smart city technology. Third project I would like to refer to is the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, which is the largest global alliance for city climate leadership, built upon the commitment of over 10,000 cities and local governments. And the objective is to help cities translate their climate action commitments into action by developing and implementing sustainable energy and climate action plans. Not only that, we will also continue to work closely with our EU member states, because of course I speak here on behalf of the European Union delegation, but we have 27 member states with us, and to promote the uptake of renewable energy in Korea, in particular offshore wind energy. So let me say a few final words and close by once again applaud the work done and the results achieved under the project and for its role in helping Korea achieving carbon neutrality. The challenges ahead are, I believe, enormous, but we can build on a solid foundation. And then final words, let me thank Joachim and Bong-hee, as well as their team members, Suni and Hemi, for the great work they've been doing over the past years. The successful would not have been possible without your never-ending commitment, expertise, and limitless energy. On behalf of the EU delegation to Korea, thank you and goodbye. 감사합니다.
네, 감사합니다.
Yes, thank you very much for those comments. Now, this is really the end of this event. On behalf of the EU-Korea Climate Action Project, I'd like to thank the DG CLIMA of the European Commission, members of the EU delegation to the ROK, and the partners from Korea and Europe who have spared no support to our project and team. We were able to complete the journey quite successfully due to your assistance and interest. And we'd also like to thank the online audience for your patience and staying with us till the very end. This brings me to the end of the closure event for the Climate Action Project. Thank you very much.